I'm looking at my ugly mug right now. I need to get more lights on my face. I got a light sitting here. I haven't been using it recently. Here we go. Here we go. You watch. What's gonna happen? Suddenly my face is gonna light up like a Christmas tree. Here we go. Boom. Look at that. I am John. I have a face. I have a face. Hey, Famita, how you doing today? Good to see you as always. Eric, how you doing, bud? Good to see you. Having a good one, man. Having a good one. I've been doing like audiobooks on and off, and I just get discouraged with myself. It's what's been happening to me for like months and months now. Is I'll do this voice work, and I just get discouraged, and I just get like, it's not. Everything is terrible, and the world sucks. And then literally every single time I go and do any amount of auditioning, I always find work. Like I always find work. And so I gotta just like accept in my heart who I am as a person, and that is a person who can do that kind of work, and I'm going to find that kind of work. I just need to keep believing in myself. You know? That's really what it is. Like I get really down on myself, and I get really like upset with myself. And I feel like this is a really common thing. Yeah, it's literally the problem every artist has. Yeah, exactly, Famita. It's totally the truth, you know? Like I'm just like I just need to continue like because it's like one of the things I've been thinking about a lot recently is how we live in like a post-truth world that not only do people it's farther than people don't know the truth, right? It's farther than that. We've hit this phase of like people don't care about what the truth is, and you can show them the truth. You can literally like show them, and they just don't care. And we're living in this world where facts, evidence, these things simply don't matter. And what matters more to people is just like their hunches. And I feel like I'm not immune to this phenomenon, especially when it comes to myself, right? Because my experience with capital and my experience with this society is one of failure, right? Mystic Werewolf, bud. Good to see you, bud. Been a minute. Been a minute. Hopefully you're doing well out in the world there, bud. No, of course I remember you, bud. You were on this wonderful journey away from classic conservatism, more towards a libertarian position, if I'm not mistaken. Hopefully that has evolved as time has moved forward. Because, like, I think that people are so confused. I know I am trying, like, that's the whole thrust of this channel, is to try to just cut through it and try to decipher what is actually occurring, right? If only for my own sanity, and if only for who I am as a person, to just know, like, okay, like, that's real. Like, there is such a thing as truth. There is such a thing as reality. And I think people are so hurt. And I know this is how I view my own pursuit of art and my own pursuit of like doing voice work and all of that kind of stuff, is like I've gone through a lot of heartache, and I feel betrayed, right? I think lots of people feel betrayed, right? And this betrayal is really starting to manifest itself in just simply like people don't want to hear it. Like they don't want to hear facts or anything from the side that they feel spurned by. And I think this is as true of the anti-woke crowd, right? Who feel kind of who feels spurned by who feels spurned by this, woke people who are trying to, bring rights and fight for people's rights and things. So, I mean, there is all that. I am evolved. I feel the burn. Bernie 2024, let's go. I am no more right wing. Yeah, we'll see what happens 2024, bud. Like, we'll see. I mean, it's Donald Trump is going to win the next presidential election. I think that's pretty much written on the stars. I think something very serious would have to happen for that result to not occur. That even if Biden were to resign or die or whatever, and then there was another Democratic convention, because the Democrats are going to get absolutely shellacked in this next in the midterms, and I mean that's just obviously they've done nothing, right? They have the House, they have the Senate, and they're not actually doing anything with it, which I mean, of course they're not. They're bought by corporations. You can just take a look at Bernie Sanders' last run-up to know that that's the truth. I mean, his run-up against Clinton, they literally stole it from him. And the run-up against Biden, like, it's kind of the same story. So I'd be surprised if Bernie Sanders became the... Good to see you, Watson. Good to see you, bud. Nerds! I'd be surprised if Sanders became the candidate. I think that the institution of the DNC is angling for Buttigieg. I think he's their guy. But really, like, unless something truly miraculous happens, like, the Democrats have shown the populace that they're not interested. Like, for God's sakes, just simple stuff. Like, real simple, straightforward shit. Like, the Biden administration, instead of, like, actually lowering student debt or tackling student debt in a meaningful way, student loans will become more expensive this year. Here are the new rates. They're literally raising the rates of student debt, right? Well, thank you, Mystic. I appreciate that, bud. I mean, we're on this journey together, right? We're on this journey together. Tell everybody I exist. Tell everybody I exist. Like, tell your friends, tell your family. Bring in your conservative friends. Bring in your conservative family. Let me talk to them, right? Like, it's you can't be a moral person and be conservative given the alignment of this society, right? Like, it's just not happening. It's not working. Like, to be a conservative in this society means standing on top of a yacht, shouting at people who are drowning, right? Swim harder while doing everything you can to push them underwater. It really is the case. Like, it really is the case. And like, the older generation are the harder ones to convince because they actually lived through a period of prosperity, right? There was a period of prosperity, and they don't want to accept that there has been a consistent effort by the corporate class to exclude people on purpose from the project of prosperity. Yeah, the truth is that you just have to swim harder. That's right. I like to ask conservatives, what are you attempting to conserve? Yeah. And like, today's modern conservatives really, like, they were the primary beneficiaries of major social programs and major ideas that their generation sought to dismantle, right? Like, I don't think that's debatable, right? Like, you essentially have groups of people who are saying, I got to where I am because I worked hard. Ignore the union. Ignore the fact that there were huge investments in infrastructure. Ignore the enormous government subsidies. Ignore the high corporate tax rate. Ignore, facts and evidence. Like, that's really what it is. Just ignore facts and evidence. And to loop back around to what I was saying at the beginning, it's like we're at this. It's like we're really in this denial phase where I do think that there's lots of people and lots of conservative sorts of people who do understand in some way that what's going on is not right, but they're so heavily invested in it that all they can do now is deny the evidence, right? Like, that's all they've got left and they're too far in, they're too far gone. Like, the hardest thing for a person to do is admit they were wrong. It is. It's the hardest thing in the world. Like, people would rather, like, self-immolate. People would rather blow up the entire person. Like, rather blow up everything than admit that they were wrong. And so now, the evidence is so overwhelming now that they just need to deny reality. Like, that's all. And just let the thing blow up. That's really what it is. Yep, your suffering is honorable. There will be crowns waiting for you in heaven. Yeah, I hear that a lot from the Christians, right? Submission to authority is godly, of course. But the truth is that work will set you free. Yeah, I cringe looking at my conservative days. That exactly. And Anna, I don't know how to pronounce this, Famita. I wish you'd never change your name. Anemone. Anemone? Anemone. 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 Cringing at the things you did in your past is most often a sign you've changed for good. That's exactly right. And Adam bringing in some sad news for us. This is sad news. Dimitri just announced he ain't running. Well, that's it then. Like, that's it. There's no hope coming from these federal parties. Like, the as far as I'm concerned, like, the project has delegitimized itself in very major ways. Like, I mean, in the United States, the Democrats and the Republicans are bought, right? Like, I understand, Mystic, that you're sitting here being like, yeah, Bernie, like, feel the burn. And, like, Bernie is useful from a cultural perspective. Like, Bernie is something of a cultural touchstone. Bernie Sanders represents the moment when somebody could say, I'm a socialist, and not immediately get chased out. Dimitri Lascaris was he was running for the leadership of the Green Party. He lost against Annemie Paul by very, very, very small margin. And my hope was that after Annemie Paul resigned, that he would run again, and that the party would swing his way. But to hear that he's not going to be running for leadership of the Green Party here in Canada, it means that there's no socialist option. It means that there is no socialist party in Canada. There is no leftist party in Canada. We have a series of far right parties here in Canada, with like a flirtation of an idea, of a glimmering of an idea of maybe being like a center left, like by 0.01 degree, right? Like we're an incredibly far right society, and it's manifested into our federal politics, right? Like the conservatives are going to be led by just like a crypto bro who's going to do a lot of, like, he's going to fire the Bank of Canada, the head of the Bank of Canada. So he's going to do a lot of performative shit. But in the end, it's just like going to be libertarianism nonsense, right? He's going to give a bunch of money to rich people. Maybe he'll do, like, conservatives often do this, where they like basically slash and privatize across the board, but then will do like one thing that has like a persistence thing. So Stephen Harper passed the child care benefit, for example, right? He doesn't talk about it and doesn't promote it because he understands that conservatives would be against it. And so, but while doing this, he's like privatizing all kinds of stuff, ensuring that people get less support. And that's what's going on the conservative side of the conversation. It's literally just slash and burn. Just take a look at the Ford administration, the Kennedy administration, the Pallister administration. You know exactly what these guys are going to do, right? Like you got to be like clueless. You got to be clueless, and to think otherwise. And then, like very, very, very slightly to the left of them, and oftentimes actually not to the left of them. Sometimes to the right of them is the Liberal Party, right? The Liberals have achieved absolutely nothing. Like they're just kind of embarrassing, frankly, as a party. Like their achievements, they immediately dismantle and undercut. The passing of the CERB should have been one of the greatest achievements of the Liberal Party in decades, but instead they just dismantled it and told everybody to get fucked. They're so weak, incapable of doing just the most basic things. And then you've got like the Liberal, the NDP. Near as I can tell, the NDP is just filling the slot that liberals should be and aren't, right? And I posted an article on the Discord. Let's bring it up. Article on the Discord. Yeah, why Milton Friedman was wrong again. Oh shit, Milton Friedman? Being wrong? No shit. How big's this article, dude? Dude, you're always giving me like a huge. I'm gonna read it. Look at this. It's got graphs and shit, guys. Are you guys ready? Are you guys ready to hear in painstaking detail why the fuck Milton Friedman, yet again, a total dipshit, obviously paid off by billionaires? Like, ugh. Well, Mystic, so I've gotten you into democratic, social democracy, okay? So the next step is to get you even farther to the left, okay? Because here's the reality about social democracy, bud. You can't vote social democracy in. You can't actually do it. There is no example and there is no situation where everybody just goes to the ballot box and they just vote social democracy and everybody goes, yeah, this is a good idea, we should do this idea, and then pass it. It's simply not how it works, right? Social democracy is the concession position by the capitalist class, by the capitalist death cult, to the populace, so that the populace does not overthrow the capitalists and install communists, right? That's how social democracy comes to be. You don't vote for it, right? You organize and you take to the streets and you surround the halls of power and you threaten your political leadership with revolution and overthrow, and then they compromise into social democracy. And that's how the New Deal was passed. That's how the baby boomer generation was allowed to be part of the project of prosperity. That's how social democracy expands throughout Europe. It's because of the threat of communism. And if you want to actually see your society become a social democracy, if that is your goal, well, then you should become a communist. And you should start organizing along communist lines. And you should say to the people in your to the politicians in your society that they're worthless, that they work exclusively for parasites, because they do. Like a man like Pierre Poilievre and Justin Trudeau, like they're losers. They just work for parasites. Like straight up. Like, they're not gonna solve housing. They're not gonna solve any of this stuff because it's benefiting the parasite class, right? All right, Mister. Good to see you, bud. Good to see you. Glad you're doing well, bud. Glad you're seeing the light. Keep on fighting, bud. Keep on fighting. Yeah, was Uncle Milty ever right? Yeah, like, I mean, even if that's how it works, the populace is brainwashed so much that once they notice the boom and bust cycles, forever wars, etc., they still exist. Their solution would go back to neoliberalism. Yeah, right. Yeah, like, people have just been like there's no such thing as a real education in the society. Like, it doesn't exist. Like, we're so down this neoliberal rabbit hole that we have like an entire generation of economists who are espousing this total nonsense. Like, and it's total nonsense. And they just aren't getting it. They aren't capable of acknowledging reality because they're focused on this chaos death market and empowering financiers and completely ignoring what an economy actually is. Yeah, Augusto Pinochet, right? Zelensky goes around celebrity events entertaining politicians and celebrities rather than trying to solve the problems Ukrainians are facing. Yeah, he's a clown, right? Zelensky's just a clown. He's just the face, right? That's it. Like, he's not actually a leader. Like, that's the thing that I think, like, all the worship and simping for Zelensky. You wanna come up, like, Okay. Milo has opinions. Yeah, I mean, like, proof's in the pudding, if you ask me, when it comes to Milton Friedman, right? Like, just look at Chile. Like, the place where Milton Friedman's policies were passed, like, the place where the United States enacted its vision of neoliberal economics, right? It's a complete fucking disaster, like, across the board. Like, show me one aspect of it. Show me one aspect of the Chilean economy that was of any benefit to the Chileans, right? But that's the reality about neoliberal economics, is that it doesn't exist to be the benefit for the public. It exists to be the benefit of the financiers exclusively. And Friedman always had this thing that he would say, like, oh, why are we trusting these politicians? It's like, because we vote for them, you dumb fuck. Like, and he's the guy spreading around the total bullshit, idiotic, moronic, stupid, dumb shit, saying, well, if you don't like If you don't like the business that how they're treating people or their costs, you can go to another business. No, you can't. That's not how monopolies work, you dumb fuck. Like, a man like Milton Friedman is illiterate. Like, he doesn't actually understand the subject, or if he does understand the subject of economics, he's selling himself to the billionaire class, right? Like, it really is as simple as this. Like, Milton Friedman was paid off, right? Probably one of the darkest figures in American politics, in American history, right? Spread a whole bunch of propaganda and bullshit into the society, and honestly, like, discredits his entire educational pursuit, right? You have, like, the Chicago boys. Like, if I find out that, like, if I'm reading a paper and I find out that they're sourcing, like, the Chicago School of Economics, I'm like, oh, okay, we're good. Like, I don't read, like, the National Enquirer for news. I don't know why I would listen to the Chicago Economics Institute for economics. Like, they're literally frauds. So it's just like, and all of this shit is, like, it's falsifiable immediately. Like, that's the part of it that's so embarrassing for these guys. And the reason why they won't actually debate communists, and the reason why they won't actually talk to socialists. And when they do, when you get a guy like Paul Krugman, who actually does debate someone like Richard Wolff, he just kind of embarrasses himself and looks like an idiot, right? Because they don't actually understand the subject. Like, they don't. Like, these economists don't understand the subject. Like, literally. And the more I read their stuff and the more I try to, like, find stuff out about them and, like, what is it they're actually talking about, I just realize, like, oh shit, your whole solution is just let rich people have all the money. Like, that's literally their whole shtick, and it's embarrassing. Yeah, keep in mind, the University of Calgary School of Economics is the Chicago School of Economics Northern Outpost. Skippy Polyev graduated from that school. Here's one thing that's interesting, though, about these guys, right? Like, Stephen Harper was also an economist guy, like an economics fellow, but he actually believed it. Like, that's what makes him an interesting figure to me. That you can disagree with Harper, and you should, but he wasn't a fraud. Like Justin Trudeau's a fraud. Like, Trudeau walks around saying all kinds of shit, and he obviously doesn't believe it. Like, obviously doesn't believe it. Like, he doesn't give a shit about any of this. He didn't give a shit about electoral reform. He doesn't actually give a shit about poverty. He doesn't give a shit about truth and reconciliation. He doesn't give a shit about any of it, right? Like, he's just a fraud, and it's become plain. Like, it's become as plain as it can be. Stephen Harper was not a fraud. He believed in, and still does believe in, neoliberal economics. Like, he thinks that that's how an economy works, and it actually was to his detriment as a ruler, right? Because, and you'll see this happen, by the way, right? Skippy is a true believer in free market economics, all the garbage that ideology entails. But here's the thing, is that the owners of the society actually hate this, right? They actually do hate this, because the way that the capitalist system is structured is structured to collapse, right? It's structured to fail. And it does fail repeatedly, right? The boom-bust cycle, right? Like, it just goes up and down all the time. So when that was happening under Stephen Harper's response was tough tits, right? Like, if you can look at his record in regards to lobbying for the fossil fuel industry, right? The fossil fuel industry literally stopped lobbying the Harper government, because they would lobby him, and Harper would be like, this is a free market economy, make it work, get the fuck out of here. You want government intervention? No. I'm not going to give you a subsidy for your failure. Get the fuck out of here, right? That was Stephen Harper's response to these guys, right? You got to look to the liberals if you want to see huge subsidies and buyouts and bailouts of the fossil fuel industry. The conservatives were looking at these guys being like, nope. Like, if you can't make it work, says that free market capitalism says that your enterprise collapses, get the fuck out of here. So he believed it, right? And capitalists hate that. Capitalists hate that there was a politician in power, which is why they ultimately stopped supporting him, which is why you have, like, some loser kid with just the name of a former prime minister swelling in the polls and seizing power, because they're like, oh, this loser kid will do what we say, right? Instead of this guy who's not actually listening to us. And it really just goes to show you that, like, Like, I remember one time Peterson said, I'd rather have an idiot in power than an ideologue, right? And he said this in regards to Wynne versus Ford. And I completely disagree with that. I would much rather have an ideologue than an ideologue I disagree with than an idiot, right? Because an idiot will just destroy everything because he's too stupid to realize what he's doing. Like what Ford did with the green energy shit, right? Ford's destruction of the green transition here in Ontario will go down in history as one of the stupidest things any leader of any country has ever done. He walked in to a plan that was in motion to transition his economy from a fossil fuel economy to a green economy, to build jobs, to create a new future for the people living in his province, and he destroyed it. Why? Because he's stupid. Because he's stupid, right? I would much rather have like a straight up ideologue, like someone like Stephen Harper, who I disagree with, but because then at least he's predictable. Because then at least he's doing stuff that I'm like, well, I don't agree with it, but I see where he's coming from. He said he'd do it, and then he went and he did it. Right? Or someone like Trudeau, who's too fucking stupid to find his own shoes. Like, the guy's just like a walking fucking haircut, reads cue cards. He's too dumb to realize that what he's doing is destroying the country. And it makes him completely unpredictable. Right? Like, during the pandemic, that's what really added a whole level of stress. So that nobody knew what these guys were going to do. Because they don't know what they're going to do, because they're too stupid to figure anything out. Like, if at this stage in the game, I gotta tell you, right? There's only two reasons why I did a video about a basic income today. There's only two reasons why you wouldn't pass a basic income. The first is ideological, right? You didn't earn it, if we give money to poor people, then we can't exploit them and for free labor, right? So ideological, and that's the conservatives. Or it's just stupid. You're just too stupid to realize that it's actually a beneficial policy. And I think that's kind of where the liberals are at. I just think that they're too stupid to realize it. Like, anybody who actually passes this basic income is going to have their face on money. They're gonna be considered one of the greatest prime ministers who ever lived. Like, but they're too stupid to put it together. And like, it's just like we are going to see the liberals get defeated in the next election because they're too dumb. They're just too stupid to figure this shit out. And then Skippy will come into power and just be a dumb neoliberal. But at least he'll be predictable. In 2008, when the economy collapsed, Sweater Vest Stevie claimed that there were excellent stock buying opportunities. Yeah, no, but there were, right? Like, if that's why the boom bust cycle is actually beneficial to capitalists, right? When it's boom, they're making money all over the place. Oh my goodness, everything's great. And then when it's bust, they just lay everybody off and then buy up cheap capital, right? Isn't UBI a slave? I think you mean salve, right? To take all the surplus value created in industry by placating the populace in the face of automation? I mean, yeah. Like, let's talk about the UBI from the communist perspective, right? Like that a UBI, and it's so funny. I just recently had a conversation with somebody who was saying that, oh, that's the UBI looks like a communist wet dream, and I'm just like, the UBI is not communist. Like, it's not what the communists are talking about. It's never what the communists have been talking about. A basic income is a reform to capital, right? It you could more successfully call it like a social democracy idea, right? Like it's a reform of the capitalist system. It's a way to ensure that the means of production stay in the hands of the ruling class, right? That the whole purpose, the whole thing that communists say is that the means of production should be in the hands of the workers, right? That's the goal. Basic income doesn't achieve that, and in fact will likely lengthen the amount of time it takes to get to a place where where the workers own the means of production, right? That, which is the ultimate goal of any communist project and any communist idea, is a socialist project. And the basic income can simply, yeah, just allow huge sections of the populace to subsist, to exist in the world without starvation. But ultimately, all of the decisions are being made by a small handful of psychos, and which will ultimately turn on the society, as they have already done, in fact. And we don't. And so the question is, should we support a basic income or not, right, as communists? I see the value of a basic income simply because, and this is really where I'm at, the populace isn't ready for anything bigger than that, right? The populace is too invested in this idea of capital, that they're too bought in to the capitalist system, and the concept that we should do away with capitalism and transfer the means of production into the hands of the working class. It's too much. It's too much for the average person. And they much prefer the idea that, here's a simple, easy reform, something we've already done, frankly, with the CERB, right? Something that we're already doing with the old age pension and the child care benefit, something that we have like all the evidence to show that it in fact does work. To the degree that it does. But critics of it are right when they say, yeah, the basic income will be used as a political tool, it'll be used as a wedge issue, it maintains the antagonistic core, which is that there are owners and that they're owned, right? It maintains the central antagonism of the society, and politicians absolutely will use that as a wedge issue in order to divide the populace. Absolutely. Like, take a look at what they've done with taxpayers. Like, it's really become quite easy to see, right? That is the case and that is what they'll do. But it's a complex issue. It's a complex issue. I do think that a basic income is better than the system that we've got now. And ultimately, to me, it comes down to the acceptability of it by the populace. Like, if the communists were actually, like, if we had thousands of communists in the streets, the way that some countries do, right? If we actually had, like, power in the streets, and we were able to actually put on a show and shut down infrastructure to the degree that we actually need to have, if we want to have a stable society ever, then I would be kind of talking a different game, because then the transfer of the means of production into the hands of the working class would be more believable as an idea. But there's not support for it in the populace, right? You could just take a look at the way we vote, for God's sakes. Like, Doug Ford's going to win this next election. Like, you want to honestly tell me that even something as simple as a basic income is even being contemplated while Doug Ford is winning? Like, no, it's not on the table. Like, the populace wants poverty. They want it. They're voting for it, right? That what is happening in our society, and you can see this with the way. No. You can see this with the way. I mean, first of all, the polls, right? This gets updated yesterday, right? Ford down just a little hair's breadth. And it looks like it got picked up mainly by the Greens and the Liberals a little bit. But this is like hair's breadth stuff. But that said, it did mean that the Conservatives lost 2 seats, right? So, like, that's how thin these margins actually are, right? That if Ford dropped 5 points and Del Duca went up 5 points, it would be a Liberal majority. So, like, it's actually quite close. But you're seeing, right? Ontario NDP and PCs position themselves as Labour-friendly, each net new endorsements. But when you see who's endorsing who, right? It's private, like, it's the labor unions for private corporations and private institutions that are going Ford's way, and it's public government places that are going the NDP, right? So the society is being divided along pretty clear lines, and people are going conservative because they understand that they need to be on the side of the project of prosperity, that the conservatives are limiting the amount of people who are allowed to be involved in the project of prosperity. That as long as you're willing to be a cop or a construction worker of some kind, or like a trades worker of some kind, you're allowed to be in the project of prosperity. If you're a service worker, if you're even like a nurse, a teacher, right? If you want to be a mother, right? If you want to exist in the society outside of those sort of very narrow bandwidths, then you're getting fucked over completely, right? Which is kind of why it's shocking there's so much support for Ford in this case. Like, I understand why there's some, but like enough to become the premier seems a bit much. At this point, not making people go to BS jobs would likely be extremely beneficial to the environment. Why make folks use intensive transport to go intensive jobs? Yeah, like, I mean, it's like we saw this over the pandemic. Like, we locked down the economy for a small period of time, and pollution went down immediately, and the environment started to heal itself immediately, right? We saw it, like literally with our eyes, we saw it. And the idea that we can't do that, I think is childish. Like, of course we can. Like, but we're stuck. We're stuck. Like, we're a warmongering, crazed people. Like, the number one polluter that's going around the earth right now is the United States military. Like, and they don't see this as a national security issue at all. Right? Going overseas to Somalia and meddling in Somalia, that's what really matters, right? Like, that's what really fucking matters. We got to go to Somalia and start fucking around in Somalia if we want to not pollute the place. Well, wait a minute. How are you going to pay for that, right? But if you want to go destroy some Somalians, off you go. Easy to do. Keep in mind, from a class perspective, some of these tradespeople are making enough income to be in the upper 10% that believes in the idealism of capitalism. Yeah, I mean, like, part of the issue of the just get a job crowd is that many of them just got a job, and that's what they do, right? That they've sacrificed themselves to this pursuit. And many of them, I think, are quite proud of it, right? Like, if you're an electrician or a carpenter or any of these sorts of things, like, that's great. But here's the reality, is that these people, these tradespeople, are going to be put to work on worthless projects, right? Or projects that are not going to manifest to the benefit of the public, like this highway, Highway 413. Like, so basically, all of these guys are voting for someone to give them a make work project, while turning around and saying to the people who have been excluded from the make work project, just get a job. Like, that's straight up what it's happening. Yeah, it's not about jobs or work, it's about enforcing the hierarchy. If they can force you to come to the office, they can force you to do more, yeah? Enforcing the hierarchy is exactly right, because in the conservative mindset, and you can just listen to Peterson to see that this is the truth, the hierarchy is self-justifying. That you have to justify yourself to the hierarchy, it's not the other way around. The hierarchy doesn't need to justify itself to you, right? Which is the linchpin disagreement in our society, right? That I would argue that a hierarchy that withholds food and shelter from the populace, unless they enslave themselves to a death cult, right? Like, I'd argue that that's a hierarchy that hasn't justified itself. Darius, good to see you, bud. The only labor-friendly politicians are the one that support a disability benefit. Yeah, conservatives won't. But Polyev seems open to letting disabled people work without limits, but I don't trust him, to be honest. Because what about people that cannot work? They tried pushing a workers' benefit towards them the last time. Yeah, I mean, like, Polyev is like a complete wild card to me. Like, I think he is going to actually he'll be the conservative leader, certainly. He's by a wide margin the front runner. The only reason it doesn't happen is if some weird thing happens in like the third ballot or something, right? Which does happen, right? But he looks to be like a big front runner right now. And then oh yeah, dude, I'm just distracted. That's all, Eric. I will. No. I'm just distracted, bud. I'm easily distracted, Eric. I'm easily distracted. That's all it is. Look, and okay, I'm going to say this about Polyev, and then I am going to read this article for you, Eric, because I value and appreciate you. And thank you for reminding me. Absolutely. Look, the thing that's scariest the most about Polyev is that he's a very effective liar. Like, he's a very effective liar. He knows that he's lying, he understands it, and he really does, like, lead you down the garden path, and then right at the end, right when he's earned your trust, he digs the dagger in and twists it, right? That's what makes him very, very scary to me. He's a very effective liar. Okay. The truth about inflation. Why Milton Friedman was wrong again. Now, this is quite a long article, Eric, so I might jump around, okay? I might, jump up and jump ahead. Okay. By Blair Fix from Economics from the Top Down. Milton Friedman has been dead for more than a decade, but his ghost still haunts us. In the 1960s, Friedman declared that inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon, a problem of printing too much money. Since then, whenever inflation rears its head, you can count on someone to reanimate Friedman's ghost and blame the government for spending too much. If only inflation were so simple. Like much of economic theory, Friedman's thinking appears plausible on first glance. Inflation is a general rise in prices, and since prices are nothing but the exchange of money, more circulating money means prices must increase. Hence, inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon. Unfortunately, this thinking falls apart on further inspection. The problem is that it treats inflation as a uniform rise in prices. That's theoretically convenient, but empirically false. In the real world, inflation is wildly divergent. At the same time that the price of apples rises by 5%, the price of cars could grow by 50%, and the price of clothing might fall by 20%. To understand inflation as it actually exists, we must look not to economics textbooks, but to real-world data. That's what the political economist Jonathan Nidzin did during his PhD research in the 1990s. His work culminated in a dissertation called Inflation as Restructuring. In the real world, Nidzin observed price change is always differential, meaning there are winners and losers. The consequence is that inflation is not purely a monetary phenomenon, as Milton Friedman claimed. Inflation restructures the social order. In this real-world feature of inflation, that is most important because it means that inflation signals a change in society's power structure. Predictably, it is this real-world feature that mainstream economists ignore, largely because it conflicts with their tidy theory of inflation as a monetary phenomenon. Fortunately, the evidence is clear. Inflation is, and always has been, overwhelmingly differential. Inflation is restructuring. Today, as inflation fears return and Friedman's ghost is resurrected, it's worth reminding ourselves of the real-world facts. The quantity theory of money. Let's start with Milton Friedman's quantity theory of money, which proposes that inflation is always caused by printing too much money. Like so much of neoclassical economics, the theory is a mixture of two things: dubious assumptions about human behavior, an accounting identity that makes the theory look good. The potency of this mixture was solidified by Friedman's famous F-twist, in which he argued that a theory's assumptions are irrelevant. All that matters, Friedman claimed, is that the theory make accurate predictions. Friedman's F-twist gets dubious assumptions off the hook, but there is still the problem of predictions. How do you ensure that your theory is consistent with the evidence? Here, neoclassical economists have hit upon a tidy trick. Frame your theory in terms of an accounting identity. Since the identity is true by definition, any test of the theory will come out in your favor. An old trick. Before we get to Friedman's theory of inflation, let's look at some other implementations of this accounting identity trick. When neoclassical economists test their theory of income, the theory of marginal productivity, they invoke an accounting identity. They correlate two related forms of income, usually sales and wages, and then call one of the incomes productivity. Since they always find a correlation, they always confirm their theory of income. Nifty. Then there's the neoclassical theory of economic growth. The theory assumes that economic output is governed by a production function that dictates how inputs of capital, labor, and technological progress are transformed into economic output. And guess what? The approach seems to have overwhelming empirical support. The problem, pointed out by Anwar Sheikh, is that the production function is actually a rearrangement of a national accounting identity. The production function works because it's true by definition. Nice. Milton's money. Back to Milton Friedman's theory of inflation. Like a good neoclassical economist, I keep wanting to say economist, and that's definitely wrong. Economist. Friedman grounds his theory in an accounting identity, one that relates the quantity of money to the average price level P. MV equals PT. In this identity, V is the velocity of money, the rate that money changes hands, and T is an index of the real value of all transactions. The nice thing about this accounting identity is that it is true by definition. So if you tie a theory of inflation to it, your predictions will always work. The problem, pointed out by critics, is that this identity tells us nothing about causation. It could be that printing too much money causes prices to rise, or it could be that rising prices drive people to borrow and hence create more money. When identities mislead, a more subtle problem with our accounting identity is that it may mislead more than it guides. The identity tells us about the average price level P. Economists then assume that this average is a useful measure of price behavior. But that might not be true. Here's how things can go wrong. Consider a society that sells two commodities, apples and oranges. If the two commodities are sold in equal proportions, the price index P is the arithmetic average of the price of the two fruits. If each fruit costs $1, then the price index is P1 equals $1 per apple plus $1 per orange over 2, which equals $1 per fruit. Suppose that after a few months the price of apples rises by 50% while the price of oranges falls by 50%. This change represents a drastic restructuring of the price system, a mixture of hyperinflation and hyperdeflation. Yet this instability doesn't register in our price index. The average price level remains unchanged, as you see. So just because the average price is unchanged doesn't mean that individual prices are stable. If price change is divergent, then the idea of an average price level is uninformative, if not outright misleading. The trouble with averages. In the hands of economists, the idea of an average price level is, to echo Joan Robinson, a powerful instrument of miseducation. The trouble is that averages are a mathematical identity. They are true by definition. I can calculate the average of any conceivable set of numbers, but that doesn't mean my calculation will be informative. That's because averages define a central tendency, yet do not indicate if this tendency actually exists. Here's an example. Suppose two people have an average net worth of $100 billion. Is this a central tendency? Perhaps. If our two people are Warren Buffett and Mukesh Ambani, both have close to the same wealth. But if the two people are Jeff Bezos and me, in this case the average misleads more than it informs. Of course, scientists are aware of this problem. That's why they are trained to report averages together with a measure of variation. Doing so gives a sense for the meaningfulness of the average. Any measure of variation will do, but the most popular is the standard deviation, which measures the average deviation away from the mean. Returning to my wealth example, reporting the standard deviation of wealth tells us when the average measures a real central tendency and when it does not. For instance, Warren Buffett and Mukesh Ambani have an average net worth of $100 billion, with a net worth standard deviation of $5.7 billion. The fact that the variation is small, about 0.06 times the average, indicates that there is a real central tendency. In contrast, Jeff Bezos and I have an average net worth of $100 billion with a standard deviation of $141 billion. This enormous variation, 1.4 times the average, indicates that there is no central tendency in the raw data. So the average is uninformative. I hope you guys are enjoying this one, because I'm interested. It's a bit dry. It's economics, though, right? I love it. Reporting averages, unreported variation. The idea that averages should be reported together with a measure of variation is a basic part of empirical science. And yet, when economists study inflation, this practice is conspicuously absent. Why? Because they're supporting a religious ideology and they aren't scientists at all. Perhaps economists have a good reason for not reporting inflation variation. To consider this possibility, let's dig into how economists measure inflation. It starts with something called a price basket. This is just a bunch of commodities whose prices are tracked over time. The Consumer Price Index, for instance, tracks a basket of commodities typically purchased by consumers. The Wholesale Price Index, in contrast, tracks a basket of wholesale commodities. There are many different types of baskets, but here I'll focus on the Consumer Price Index. Having chosen a basket of commodities, economists then track the average price of the basket. If you read the technical literature, you'll see that economists have various formulae for giving some commodities more weight than others when they average prices. The math looks fancy, but it doesn't change the fact that the output is a type of average. Watch out, though, because economists won't call it an average. They'll call it a price index. Oh, wow, obfuscating data. Oh, I've never seen religious acolytes do that kind of thing. With their price index in hand, economists then judge the rate of inflation, be seeing how fast the index rises over time. As an example, Figure 1 plots the percentage change in the U.S. Consumer Price Index since January 1st, 2020. Over this period, the index rose by 7%. Inflation! Having looked at the price index trend, pundits will then discuss the cause and consequences of inflation. Here, for instance, is commentary from the New York Times. Consumer prices surged at the fastest pace in more than 3 decades in October as fuel costs picked up. Supply chains remained under pressure and rents moved higher. Worrying news for economic policymakers at the Federal Reserve and for the Biden White House. Given the trend in Figure 1, such commentary seems justified. And yet it is missing a crucial piece of information. I've shown you the movement of the average price, but I've told you nothing about price change variation. The reader is left to draw their own conclusions about how inflation varies by commodity. With this lack of information, most people will assume that the movement of the average price indicates a strong central tendency. In other words, they'll assume that inflation is uniform, and they might be right. Inflation, like gravity. Perhaps economists have a good reason for not reporting price change variation. Maybe this variation is so small that it's not worth recording. In this case, inflation is like Earth's gravity, remarkably uniform. In high school physics, I did hundreds of projectile motion calculations. In each problem, we'd assume that the acceleration of gravity was a uniform 9.81 miles per second squared. I vaguely recalled my teacher mentioning that this acceleration varied slightly around the world, depending on geography. But we never included this variation in our calculations, nor did any of my textbooks report it. Were physicists hiding something from me? To consider this possibility, I headed over to the International Gravimetric Bureau, I loved the name, and downloaded data on the variation in Earth's gravity. As with anything in science, there's an assortment of ways to estimate Earth's gravity anomalies, the differences in the acceleration of gravity across the Earth's surface. But for the purposes of high school physics, the different methods don't matter. Any way you slice it, the geographic variation in Earth's gravity is incredibly small. In the data that I downloaded, the standard deviation of Earth's gravity anomaly is about 40,000 times smaller than the textbook average acceleration of 9.81 miles per second squared. So unless you're doing an incredibly sensitive experiment, gravity variation is so tiny that you can ignore it. Perhaps economists don't report price change variation because, like gravity variation, it is insignificantly small. To consider this possibility, let's return to the movement of U.S. Consumer Price Index, a measure of the average price level. Suppose that alongside this price index we plotted the price movement of every commodity in the CPI basket. If inflation was overwhelmingly uniform, the results might look like Figure 2. What price change would look like if inflation was nearly uniform across commodities? The black line shows the change in the actual U.S. Consumer Price Index. The colored lines show what the price change of individual commodities would look like if inflation was nearly uniform. In Figure 2, the colored lines show the indexed price of individual commodities. I should stress that this is simulated data. The actual data, which we'll see shortly, looks quite different. The point of this simulation is to show you what it would look like if inflation was overwhelmingly uniform. Over the period shown, the official consumer price index increased by 7.2%. In my simulation, inflation is so uniform that across all commodities, the standard deviation of price change was 0.15%. At just 2% of the average, this variation is so small that we can ignore it. So perhaps economists know that inflation varies slightly between commodities, but they also know that this variation is so small that it's not worth reporting. Inflation in the real world. Having shown you what price change would look like if inflation was overwhelmingly uniform, let's now look at inflation in the real world. It's rather different. Figure 3 shows the price change of every commodity tracked by the Consumer Price Index. Instead of clustering tightly around the average price level, the official CPI, real-world commodities have a mind of their own. Their prices head in all sorts of directions, often in ways that seem unrelated to the movement of the average price. Price change in the real world. The black line shows the change in the U.S. Consumer Price Index since January 1st, 2020. The colored lines show the index price of all the individual commodities tracked by the CPI. Many commodities are tracked in multiple locations. All over the place. All over the place. Notice how plotting the price change of all CPI commodities alters the inflation story. Looking at Figure 3, no one would conclude that all prices are inflating uniformly. Yet, when we looked at the Consumer Price Index alone, this conclusion seemed plausible. When we study the whole range of price change, we see that inflation is a messy business. The numbers tell us much. Since January 1st, 2020, the Consumer Price Index rose by 7.3%. That value seems significant until we measure price change variation. Over the same period, the standard deviation of price change was 10.7%. So the variation in price change was about 1.5 times larger than the price change average. To put this variation in perspective, let's return to our wealth example. Jeff Bezos and I have an average wealth of $100 billion. But this value does not indicate a real central tendency. Jeff Bezos is worth $20 billion. I am worth $0 billion. We can tell that the average is misleading by measuring the standard deviation of our wealth, which happens to be $141 billion. So the variation in our wealth is about 1.4 times the average. This ratio of 1.4, you'll notice, is actually less than the ratio of 1.5 we found for the price change variation. So if we conclude that it's rather meaningless to average my wealth with Jeff Bezos' wealth, we should also conclude that the movement of the Consumer Price Index is quite meaningless. Both averages mislead more than they inform. Okay, Milo. Okay, I'll be there in a minute, okay, bud? My pug is like sitting here with his Kong there, being like, I need peanut butter, John. I need peanut butter. And he's just like whining at me about it. Because he does need peanut butter. I'll finish this article, get the peanut butter, then we'll do the number draw. A story of inflation variation. The real story of inflation, the one that goes largely unreported, is of wildly divergent price change among different groups of commodities. Figure 4 shows how this inflation has played out across 12 major commodity groups, tracked by the U.S. Consumer Price Index. U.S. price change by commodity group. Box plots show the range of price change between January 2020 and October 2021 for U.S. CPI commodities classified into 12 major groups. Here's how to read the box plot. The thick vertical line indicates the median value. The box shows the middle 50% of the data, and the line shows the range of data, excluding outliers. 1 second, guys. Okay, Milo, dude. Okay, dude. You gotta chill out, okay, bud? Here. We're taking a peanut butter break. Peanut butter, peanut butter, peanut butter. Oh my god. Oh my god. It is amazingly difficult to read this sort of stuff when there's a little pug whining in your ear. he wants is a little bit of peanut butter. So we're doing a peanut butter break for Milo. Peanut butter time. There you go, bud. Oh my goodness. Oh, to be a tiny pug. The peanut butter is all I want. And when I whine and Little John, I'll eventually get everything I want. To be a pug, man. To be a pug. Okay, sorry about that, guys. Now I got peanut butter on my hands. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Box plots are fun to make. Fantastic. Let's break down the analysis. First, I've tracked the price change of every commodity in the U.S. Consumer Price Index basket in every geographic location between January 2020 and October 2022. Then I've put these commodities into major groups, as classified by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Finally, I use box plots to show the variation in price change within each commodity group. The story told by this disaggregated analysis is dramatically different than the one told by the movement of the average price. We can see that inflation varies greatly between different commodity groups. Some groups, like men's apparel, have experienced little, if any, inflation. Other groups, like private transportation, have seen massive price hikes. Figure 4 also shows that inflation varies greatly within each commodity group. Inflation often coexists with deflation, a fact that's evident when the boxes cross the dashed red line. So the real, like private transportation, is like way the front over here. So men and boys apparel, kind of just right back there. Okay. So the real inflation story, which goes largely undiscussed, is that price change is remarkably non-uniform. In fact, it is so non-uniform that reporting the change in the average price borders on meaningless. So why does price change variation go unreported? Perhaps we can excuse newspapers from not printing charts like figures 3 and 4. These graphs are admittedly more challenging to interpret than simply reporting on the percentage change of a price index. This difficulty, though, doesn't get economists off the hook. Every trained economist ought to know how to interpret the type of evidence shown above, and yet, even in the technical literature, you're unlikely to find a disaggregated analysis of inflation. Why? Could it be that the whole institution's been taken over by religious acolytes? Is this time different? Before we chastise economists for not reporting price change variation, let's give them the benefit of the doubt. No, let's not do that. Perhaps inflation is normally uniform, but our current circumstances are unusual. It would be that the pandemic has wrought chaos in an otherwise stable price system. Yeah, capitalism, known for being a stable price system. In this case, if we look at the deeper history of inflation, we ought to see a pattern of uniformity in which all prices move together. To investigate this possibility, let's look at the long-term history of U.S. inflation. We'll start with the standard picture, shown in Figure 5. I've measured the inflation rate in terms of the annual change of the Consumer Price Index. The red lines show the threshold for double-digit price change, an arbitrary but frequently referenced threshold for major inflation. Annual change in the U.S. Consumer Price Index. Like, even looking at this graph, you're like, yeah, stable economy, right? Whoa! The blue line shows the annual rate of change in the U.S. Consumer Price Index. Dashed red lines show the threshold for double-digit inflation. How amazing. I could write a book about the inflation ups and downs shown in Figure 5, but I won't, since many such books exist. Instead, I'm interested in what is absent from this picture, namely, price change variation. Perhaps economists ignore price change variation because, although it is large today, historically it has been negligible. That would make our current situation what economists call a distortion, an event that has forced prices out of equilibrium. In less distorted times, we ought to find price change uniformity. To see if this is true, let's look at the long-term history of U.S. price change variation. Figure 6 shows the data. I start by replotting the average inflation rate, the blue line, but then I add some much-needed information. The range of price change across all CPI commodities. That's the blue region. which plots the 95% range for the annual price change of all commodities in all locations tracked by the CPI. The price change range is rather large. The blue line shows the annual change in the consumer price index replotted from figure 5. Doink. The shaded region shows the 95% range, the range for the middle 95% of the data, and the annual price change of all commodities in all locations tracked by the CPI. Looks a bit different, doesn't it? A little bit different. The evidence in figure 6 suggests that our current situation is not unusual. Since the CPI data began in 1913, the US inflation rate averaged 2.8%. But over the same period, the standard deviation of annual price change averaged 5.2%. So the inflation variation was historically about 1.8 times larger than the inflation average. To remind you, the variation between Jeff Bezos' wealth and my wealth was only 1.4 times our average wealth. So looking at the average US inflation rate is even less meaningful than averaging Bezos' wealth with my own. To summarize, the data is pretty clear. The historical norm has been for price change variation to trump the average rate of inflation. So why does this variation go unreported? An unreported pattern in the unreported data. Before we all call the science police, let's give economists one last chance to redeem themselves. Why? I don't understand why. Why would we do that? Okay, this guy wants to. Although it certainly seems dubious that price change variation is rarely reported, perhaps we can think of a good reason not to worry about it. The only reason I can come up with is that price change variation is large, but otherwise consistent. If price change variation is steady over time, then perhaps we can ignore it when we measure the movement of the average price. To consider this possibility, let's imagine a counterfactual US in which price change variation is consistent over time. In the US, annual price change varies by commodity, but this variation is steady year to year. It's fixed at the average range found in the real-world US. The red lines in figure 7 show that this is what this counterfactual US would look like. We see that the range of price change variation does not fluctuate. Instead, it has a constant width. The red lines are a constant distance apart. We also see this counterfactual US is rather different than the real world. The blue lines in the shaded region reproduce from figure 6 the real-world trends in US prices. The red lines show what price change variation would look like if it was constant over time at the historical average. Rather, our counterfactual thought experiment demonstrates that in the real world, price change variation, the blue shaded region, is not constant. Sometimes this variation was far larger than the historical average, indicated in figure 7, when the blue shaded region extends outside the red lines. Like way down here, up here, over here. Such was the case during the stagflation crisis of the 1970s and during the inflationary bouts of both world wars. But sometimes price change variation was much smaller than the historical average. Such was the case during the Roaring Twenties and again during the boom years in the 1960s. Given these observations, it appears we have a problem. Price change variation is large, yet goes unreported. Moreover, price change variation itself varies over time. So we have an unreported pattern in the unreported data. That's bad. It means economists have been ignoring an important aspect of inflation. Economists ignoring facts? Get out of here. But it gets worse. Had economists bothered to measure and report price change variation, they'd have discovered an interesting correlation. Price change variation rises and falls with the average rate of inflation. Figure 8 shows the trend. On the horizontal axis, I've plotted the annual change in the consumer price index, a measure of inflation. On the vertical axis, I've plotted the variation in the annual price change of all CPI commodities, as measured by the standard deviation. The red line shows the smooth trend, which has a U shape. The data suggests that the more rapidly prices change on average, the more differential inflation becomes. As prices change more rapidly on average, inflation becomes more differential. The horizontal axis shows the annual change in the US Consumer Price Index, The vertical axis shows the standard deviation of annual price change among all commodities tracked by the CPI. The red curve shows the smoothed trend. What we see in Figure 8 is a manifestation of Jonathan Nitson's discovery. Inflation restructures the price system. It's this feature that makes inflation socially traumatic. An insignificant thing? In the 19th century, political economist John Stuart Mill famously declared that money was of little interest. There cannot, in short, be intrinsically a more insignificant thing in the economy of society than money. John Stuart Mill, 1871. Although this claim has always struck me as dubious, it's easy to imagine a world in which it were true. Consider a world in which inflation is utterly uniform. All prices, including wages, rise and fall together. In this world, Mill's dictum holds. Price change is meaningless. Today the price of an apple is $1, tomorrow it doubles to $2. But since the price of everything else also doubles, including your income, nothing changes. Inflation is an insignificant thing. Unfortunately, for Mill's dictum, the real world works differently. In it, inflation is never uniform. It is always differential, and that makes it highly significant. Inflation restructures the social order, producing winners and losers. It is this restructuring, Jonathan Nitson realized, that is the most important aspect of inflation, and yet, it is this feature that economists always completely ignore. But it works in theory. For some reason, economists didn't listen to the memo given to all other scientists, the one that said, "Thou shalt report an average alongside a measure of variation." So why the miseducation? Is it an accident, or is it by design? Sadly, I think it's the latter. Economists ignore the variation memo because their notion of inflation assumes that price change is uniform, much like the old joke. An economist says to a physicist, "Sure, this equation works in practice, but does it work in theory?" Applied to inflation, the joke is, "Sure, inflation is widely divergent in practice, but is it widely divergent in theory?" The answer is overwhelmingly no. In economic theory, inflation is assumed to be uniform. But why would economists assume something so at odds with reality? Here's what I think is going on. I treat the "does it work well in theory" joke as a litmus test for ideology. It's a test to see if someone elevates ideas above evidence. The more they do so, the less they are doing science and the more they are promulgating ideology. Apply this litmus test to mainstream economics, and you see that it is a secular priesthood masquerading as science. I need a bell, man. I need a bug. Ding, 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 ding. All right, here we go. We've actually got an economist presenting real economics saying the thing I've been saying. What have I been saying the whole time? Not only in this article, but for like years now on this fucking channel. I've been like, it's a priesthood. It has nothing to do with reality. Oh my God. Look at this. This guy's a genius, mainly because he agrees with me. Bias confirmed. Thank you very much. The monetarist monastery. As an example of this priesthood, take monetarism, a school of thought popularized by Milton Friedman. According to monetarists, most social ills are caused by the government printing or spending too much money. Unsurprisingly, monetarists think that these problems have a simple solution: government austerity. Back to inflation. Faced with rising prices, most monetarists will quickly call for government belt tightening. Their logic works like this. Inflation is linked to the money supply via the formula MV equals PT, MV equals PT, where M is the quantity of money and P is the average price level. 2, the government controls the money supply. 3, the government needs to spend less. Like most good ideologies, this argument contains a devious trick. What monetarists won't tell you is that the money supply gives meaningful insight into inflation only if price change is uniform. If price change varies wildly by commodity, as it does in the real world, then the movement of the average price tells you little, if anything, about the movement of individual prices. And that means the money supply tells you little, if anything, about real-world inflation. Faced with this problem, The monetarist solution is to make their ideas work in theory. Assume inflation is uniform. Call for austerity. Repeat. Sallow's snake oil. Here we go. Fuck this guy. This Thomas Sallow guy. This fucking asshole. Although popular in the late 20th century, monetarism was always a controversial subsect of neoclassical economics. Many moderate economists thought monetarism was quackery. Hence, it's not, it's a different guy. That's fine. Hence, Robert Solow's famous dig at Milton Friedman. Everything, Solow quipped, reminds Milton of the money supply. Well, everything reminds me of sex, but I keep it out of the paper. Monetarists' digs aside, Robert Solow and his fellow macroeconomists, see what I'm seeing? It's fuck. Maintained their own brand of snake oil. For instance, Sallow's famous paper describing his model of economic growth began with this zinger. There's only one commodity, output as a whole. Thus, we can speak unambiguously of the commodity's real income. Among critics, the one commodity assumption gets heaps of scorn, and rightfully so. But I think we should give Sallow credit for following it up with a clever insight. If real income is to be unambiguous, we must be able to treat society as though it produces only one commodity. What Sallow is hinting at, but not acknowledging, is a severe problem in macroeconomics. The field is built on the principle that you can take the monetary value of production, Y, and separate it into two components, real production, Q, and the nominal price level, P. If there is only one commodity, then Q is unambiguous, hence Solow's comment. But the formula also works if there are multiple unchanging commodities whose prices move as one. In that case, P is an index of inflation that unambiguously describes the movement of all prices. The problem for Solow and his fellow macroeconomists is that neither of these assumptions holds in the real world. Actually existing societies produce many commodities, whose prices do not change uniformly. And that creates a problem. It means that the quantity of production, QQ, is hopelessly ambiguous. See this paper for a detailed discussion. Like monetarists, macroeconomists solve the problem by making their ideas work in theory. They simply define inflation as a uniform change in prices, and then assume that real income is unambiguous. Procrustes would be proud. Why differential inflation matters. Having seen that the price change varies greatly between commodities, you might wonder why all this matters. Well, it matters because it means that inflation is not purely a monetary phenomenon. Inflation redistributes income. Since doing his doctoral work in the 1990s, Jonathan Nitzan has gone on to publish, together with Shimshon Bichler, some eye-opening research on the distributional effects of inflation. Nitzan and Bichler have discovered, for instance, that inflation systematically benefits big business. Figure 9 shows the most recent version of their research. Let's break it down. We start with the markup, the size of a company's profits as a portion of sales. Nitzan and Bichler then measure the markup for two groups of company. The CompuStat 500, the 500 largest U.S. companies ranked by capitalization in the CompuStat database. Number 2, all U.S. corporations. Next, Nitzan and Bichler take the ratio of all of these two markups. I gotta pause for a second, guys. This guy's name is Bichler. Like, I've been saying it, I'm just trying to glaze it over. Bichler. That's Bichler, right? Like, I'm right? Like, I feel like every single time I say it, I'm like, Bichler. Like, every time. I just gotta pause and acknowledge it, just so that I can get over it. Bichler. We're there. Next, Nitzan and Bichler take the ratio of these two markups. The resulting differential markups measures the relative productivity of big business compared to the profitability of all U.S. businesses. What Figure 9 shows is that this differential markup rises and falls with the wholesale price index, a measure of inflation. In other words, inflation benefits big businesses' bottom line. Figure 9, inflation benefits big business. This is Nitzan and Bichler's chart illustrating how inflation relates to the profitability of U.S. big businesses. The thick line shows what Nitzan and Bichler call differential markup, the markup of the 500 largest U.S. public firms, ranked by market capitalization relative to the markup of all U.S. corporations. The dashed line shows the wholesale price index, a measure of inflation that focuses on wholesale commodities. An earlier version of this research can be found in Chapter 16 of Capital as Power. This update is from the Capital as Power forum. Notice how this evidence changes your view of inflation. It makes it hard to blame government for the problem. You see, if big business is systematically benefiting from inflation, it implies that these big corporations are raising prices faster than everyone else. In other words, it is oligopolies that are driving inflation. So it seems that in the real world, inflation looks nothing like it does in economics textbooks. Yes, inflation is a monetary phenomenon, as it's everything to do with prices. But more importantly, inflation is a power struggle over who can raise prices the fastest. Awesome, dude. That was a great article, man. That was a great article. Just like completely ripping the shit out of these loser economists who like are just like religious acolytes. I've been saying it all along, man. And like more and more and more and more. Like I'm yet to see like this old loser guard of total sellouts who have been professing to be scientists in a field they know nothing about, literally walking around. Like I'm yet to see any of them actually defend themselves from this new bout of actual economists who are showing up, being like, it's weird how your theories aren't real. Like, imagine if, like, a physicist stood up and said, actually, there's good evidence to show that if I release a ball, it floats upwards. It works in theory. Like, you'd be like, yeah, but, right? Like, turns out, if you actually look at the real world, let's see what you guys have been saying. That was a big article, man. That was like, I was reading for like 40 minutes. The cultural backlash, anti-wokeness, abortion restrictions, trans hate is because peasants have been living free from the elites. It's gone too far. We have to get them under control. Yeah, exactly. Right? No, and it's why they don't want to do a basic income. It's why they don't want to support a Green New Deal. It's why they don't want to do any of this, right? Because all of the solutions for the problems that our society are facing exclude the capitalists, right? The capitalists are the problem, right? They're the ones that are actually driving the issue, right? And so the solution is to be rid of them. And once they're gone, everything will get better. But so of course they don't want us to solve these problems, because to solve them means to exclude them. By definition, we have to. We don't have another solution. I listen to YouTube investors and they are genuinely scared of employees raising wages, causing a wage price spiral. It's scary how they are telling us what they're doing to our faces, making us poor. Yeah. Like they're literally just arguing in favor of our destruction, right? And like really, really think about what it is like, and like who can. This is why what we have done is so dangerous, right? Like, if you give money to the populace, whether through something like a basic income or increased wages, I don't know, dude. I feel like I've got to just like gonna pull up some like we're gonna do some straight up like I don't know why this is hard for people to understand, but it is, right? It is like literally if you've got like wages like people, right? People. This is stupid. I shouldn't have done this. People. Control Z. Get rid of this. Like, if you've got people, like people are your economy. Here they are, just like little people, right? Well, they go to work, right, at a business, right? Which they then take the money they make at the business, right? And they go, so the business pays them wages, and then they take those wages and spend it at the business. So this is wage, right? Wage, right? These guys are working for the business. Labor. This is great. This is perfect. This is exactly what we need to be doing right here. Just shitty graphs drawn by bullshit. People. People, right? People, wages, and then consumption, right? Consume, right? 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 So if the wage is low, consumption is low. It's extremely straightforward. If the wage is high, consumption is high. Like, it is actually that straightforward. And if the wage doesn't pay for the consumption, then they don't go work for you, right? Like it is actually as straightforward as this. Like, I'm sure that there's like an economist in the chat that's like looking at it being like, technically no, there's like this whole other thing. And it's like, okay, but like basically, like these guys that are saying like, oh no, there'll be a wage spiral upwards, are literally lamenting the idea that, oh, there'll be more people in the society with more money who will be able to go to more businesses, spend more money, and we'll be able to hire more people and do all this kind of stuff because we have inverted in our world what's important. And what is important is that people have money and people are taken care of. If your people aren't taken care of and they have no money to buy anything, it doesn't matter how much subsidies or how much you give these guys. It doesn't matter because no one can actually go use their fucking businesses in the first fucking place, right? If you want to have a good economy that's actually working, you need to subsidize the people, right? And tell these businesses to go get fucked. Tell them to go get fucked. And also, like, who gives a shit what the investors say? Like, they're literally parasites. Like, they're literally parasites. Like, oh, I've got money, and so I'm going to put my money over here. You all do the work, and I expect money for nothing, because I had money in the first place. You're a literal parasite. Like, you're just go away. Like, oh no, the plebs might make more money, and somehow that'll be bad for me. Like, this is what's embarrassing about these investors, dude. And it's embarrassing at this point. You want your workers to have more money. You want people in your society to have more money. Oh no, I've got to spend $200 extra a month on higher wages. But if everybody is in this state, right? If everybody is like this, then more people have money, then more people can come to your business, then you get more business, right? Like, this is what happens every single time we raise the minimum wage. Every single time we raise the minimum wage, it's like, the sky is falling, and oh my god, everything is terrible, and then the wage goes up, and suddenly there's economic growth. Businesses are getting more people in. Why? Because people have fucking money to spend. It's not hard to figure out. But we have like this entire class of rich, detached psychopaths who are genuinely vampiric ghouls, who literally are walking around being like, oh, but if people have money, then I won't be able to torture them for free. I want people to be in pain and suffering. Like, that's where we're at. Like, that's where we're at. And I don't believe anything short of that. Like, the people at the very top of this know perfectly well how to alleviate the suffering of the populace. They know perfectly well. But they also know that it would render themselves pointless. Right? Well, you think Sauron didn't understand how to solve the problems of Middle-earth? He was very aware of how to do that. But it was about power for himself. Right? That's what this conversation is about. That's the reason why we have an entire generation of economists who are frauds. Because they understand what's good for them. Oh, there's a billionaire who wants to give me money to lie. Okay. Like, pretty straightforward shit. Pretty straightforward shit. Like, the only reason to listen to these investors is to listen to what the little babies are saying, right? And just to tilt your head and be like, no, little baby doesn't really understand how an economy works. Like, ugh. I do enjoy it a lot, but then again, I study economics as my major. Yeah, I got drawn into economics more than anything. Because, like, I started because of fundamentalist Christianity, theater, all these sorts of things, like, I was coming at it from a moral position, right? And then I realized a little while back that there were lots of people who don't care about morality, right? They just don't. They don't care at all. They're literally like, my money, I have money, you don't have money, I don't care. How are you going to pay for that? How are you going to pay for that? Well, it would be worth paying for because people are being tortured. Then they should be tortured. I don't give a shit. I want money. Money for me, right? So you got to actually, like... So I started to dig into it and started to dig and dig and dig and dig and dig. And very shortly I found out, like, oh, you guys are actually paying more. Like, that's what makes this whole conversation as embarrassing as it gets. Is that we're literally paying more for, like, these shitty, terrible, dumbass outcomes. And it is because there's, like, a wealthy class that's just like, yeah, I'll pay more to torture people because I like torturing people, right? We learned this in sociology. It's looking more like sociologists or actual economists. Well, I mean, I will always talk about this, which is that even the capitalists understand that economics is a fraudulent pursuit, right? Even they understand that these institutions are fake, right? And how do we know that's true? Because they created an entirely other institution called business school, right? Because these capitalists were like, okay, we've got our priesthood spreading around this false ideology in order to dupe a stupid populace. But we still do need people who understand how businesses work and understand what reality is so that they can actually function in a society, right? So we'll make a business school where we actually train people to run businesses, right? We won't give them the macro knowledge so that they can use it and understand that we're frauds and parasites, right? But so we maintain the grift that way. But we're at least teaching them economics so they have some kind of basis in reality, right? Why would business school exist if economics was a valid pursuit, right? Like, if I walk out and have an economics degree, I should be able to run a business, right? Nope, not in this society. That's not how it works, right? Look up market basket measure. Market basket measure. The market basket measure is based on the cost of a specific basket of goods and services representing a modest basic standard of living. Yeah, that's kind of what he was talking about, right? If you want to torque a conservative's brain who thinks the formula shortage is silly, tell them that adopted babies need formula. Oh yeah, like a lot of these, just breastfeed. Just breastfeed, because life is so simple to these people. Right? Simple people have simple solutions, right? But complexity doesn't exist, right? Like, there's a reason why they're simple. Well, why do you just get a job? Well, just get a better job. It's like when Ben Shapiro says, like, people in climate change destroyed areas should just sell their houses and move, right? Because if you're a little kid and you don't actually think things through and you're too stupid to understand basic, like, that's not even economics. It's like basic, reasonable shit. Like, sell your house and who's going to buy your house? Your house has been ravaged by climate change. It's flooded. It's destroyed. Maybe it's burnt down. Who's buying this, right? And then you're going to sell your damaged property and your shitty thing. So you're going to get, like, no money for it. And then where are you going to move? Where are you going to go? Like, what are you fucking talking about, you moron? Like, Shapiro is just like that. When I heard him say that the first time, and I thought to myself, he can't seriously be like saying that out loud in front of people and think that people are going to think he's credible, right? And then he just kept saying it, and he like said it as recently as his appearance on Joe Rogan. I heard him say it, and I'm just like, bro, you're like, that was the moment when I was like, oh fuck yeah, Shapiro's maybe 5, like he's got the mental intelligence of maybe a 5-year-old. And I don't think he's ever going to grow up past that. Like, he's just stuck there because that's probably as old as his parents needed him to be, right? He just took daddy's money and is doing daddy's job, right? Very simple. Pro-life, more like pro-ensuring a workforce, yeah. Well, but even it's not even a workforce, right? Like, the American system is so, what it's interested in is a military. That's ultimately what it's interested in, right? Like, it doesn't actually care about a workforce. It cares about getting people to kill other people. The military is its only pursuit that it cares about anymore, right? And and as we move forward, it's going to be the only advantage that it has on the world stage, and it's going to use it. It's going to use it until it doesn't have enough people. And so, and because more and more people are seeing the United States military as this abhorrent demon, right? As it's abandoning veterans, as people come home from these missions and like commit suicide, like the capitalist death cult is literally shattering the generational joining of military service and the prestige that comes with it, and it's doing it by absolutely destroying its veterans, absolutely destroying its fighters, absolutely creating a culture that says, oh, the military is demonic, which is why the military is working so hard to automate itself so they can just have like one guy operating like 20 robots or whatever, right? Because they can't actually get people anymore. Right? That's why Biden is upping the budget. That's why they're trying to get recruitment. Because people are literally saying, this is an evil institution that I refuse to participate in. And so another solution that they're looking for is, well, we'll just make life so desperate and horrible for people, and we'll give benefits in the military that they can't get elsewhere, so that they'll go, I guess I'll just join the military for like a tour or something, and that's when they've got you. Because as soon as you sign up, you're not a person anymore. They can just grind you into whatever they want, right? And then you go home, they abandon you, you commit suicide. That's the cycle. That's how it works, right? And the only way it's going to stop is if people stop participating. That's really what it is. Just like stop joining the military, stop respecting military people, like stop. Like I don't understand why anybody respects military. Like, I understand that you have like there are people who join the military with this like service mindset, and I understand that maybe the military does have this kind of desire to be a service mindset, but like you're not treating climate change like the disaster that it actually is, and all you are the Nazis on the world stage. Everybody sees you this way, right? The vast majority of the world sees us as the Nazis on the world stage, and now we're literally funding Nazis. So like, proof's in the pudding. Proof's in the pudding. Stop joining the military. Stop respecting military people. Support our troops. No, like if you're signing up to go murder people overseas, I'm not interested in being your buddy. I don't think you're a good person. You're not defending anybody, right? You are the Nazis on the world stage. Ugh. You know how things are bad when the entire market has been down since October for everyone. Inflation is skyrocketing. People are getting poor, and the government just goes, "Man, get a job." Yeah, exactly. Like you're on your own now, bud. But that's exactly it. It's a project of abandonment, an exclusion from the project of prosperity, and we're voting for it. That's the best part. We're voting for it. Right? Here in Ontario, we're going to vote Doug Ford in again. So we're voting for the project of abandonment. We're voting to dismantle the civil society. We're not interested in community or culture or any of that kind of stuff, right? Like we're literally reverting into a feudal state. That's what we're doing, and everybody seems fine with it. Yeah, you aren't working hard enough, Darius. Exactly. Anemone. Have you considered getting a job for your job? Right? Capitalists be like, have you ever considered eating bugs? Then you can't complain about food costs. Yeah, it's not a bug. Yeah, thanks, Bumble. Good to see you, bud. Yo, Comrade John, want a link to evidence that Stalin was shocked at the purge list length? Is this in reference to the Great Purge? Sure, yeah. I'll take a look at that. Useless geography facts. Liechtenstein. I don't know what that's a reference to. Okay, I gotta catch up with the chat. If y equals QP, does that mean that ABC equals 1, 2, 3, and you and me? That's right. ABC, easy as 1, 2, 3, you and me. Yep. Sounds Bavarian. Bichler sounds German, probably pronounced as if it were Bickler. Oh, that's probably right. I could have just like totally rolled out of that. Oh well. I'm fine with saying Bichler the whole time. Bichler. He probably is Bickler, dude. All apologies to Mr. Bickler if that's the case. History of Sexuality, Michael Foucault. Google it. You got it, man. History of Sexuality, Michel Foucault. Uh-oh. This is the postmodern sexuality. Where the cultural Marxists are coming and destroying Western civilization. Postmodernism. What's that line for JFK? A theoretical physicist will tell you an elephant can hang from the ceiling while his tail is tied to a daisy. Theoretical physics will claim anything is possible. Kind of like U-ball theoretically rising for no... Yeah. Awesome. Thank you for my awesome drawing skills. Thank you. I've saved $1,500 conservatively from income assistance alone. Good for you, bud. Oh, Kermit JP coming out. Gas price in Russia is 92 cents a liter, dude. Like, at some point we have to just, like, it baffles my mind that people are still trying to convince me that, what's happening is just inflation. It's inflation caused by the money printing, and the money printing, that's the problem. And the way to do it is to end government spending. I'm literally like, no, bro. Corporations are just rising prices. Like, why? I don't understand why that's so difficult for people to understand. Actually, I do understand it. It's because the argument for these guys goes, well, if people were just to raise prices, then people would just go to other businesses. It's like, but there's a monopoly. Like, there's a monopoly. Do you not understand that there's a monopoly? Like, and that's just it. They don't. They don't actually respect or understand the basic concept of monopolies. They think that everything is equal, and that, well, if that grocery store is charging you too much for that, then you should just go to a different grocery store. As if that's fucking possible for huge sections of the populace, right? Like, if you're an 86-year-old woman with a grocery store that's 3 blocks away, that's where you're going, right? You're not going another 3 blocks. It takes you 2 hours to get to that grocery store, right? Like, maybe I'm crazy, but an economy looks a lot like a circulatory system. All the nutrients of money being vaulted up to the top is basically suffocating the organs. This is holding our breath. I think it's more like taking a shit, right? Like, you're right when it comes to noticing that the economy is a lot like how the body works. That it's like there's a circulation, right? Money is in circulation, right? We keep talking about this as if the money has gone to what we call the top, right? Time for us to change our language, okay? The investors are not at the top. The investors are at the bottom. They are the worst people in the society. They are the absolute dirtiest asshole that exists. Our society needs to take a shit and just shit these assholes out, right? Because all they're doing is existing in our bowels, clutching hold of nutrients and clutching hold of shit, just siphoning as much as they can away because they're parasites. And it's time for us to just take a big shit and shit the parasites out. So the money isn't trickling up, or the money isn't siphoning upwards, right? It's literally being held on by parasites in the bowels of the body that we just need to go and get rid of, right? Implying that saying that they're at the top implies that they have any value, and they don't. How we become a society that prizes efficiency and productivity over quality, sustainability, and fairness. Attending business school just might be the most efficient way to figure it out. Like, above regarding your comment about attending business school, tweet linked to podcast. Look, like, we distilled out of our society the idea that we should give a fuck about anyone. That's really what it comes down to. Like, the collapse of Christianity, the collapse of any kind of ethics or ruling system whatsoever. Like we literally don't teach our children even secular ethics. Like, we don't even try. The best they might get is like Sesame Street, right? And so they never even interact with the idea of give a shit about one another. right? And then the society is constantly bombarded with me, 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 me. It's all about me, right? It's greed is good. Literally, the celebrity culture is just about me, 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 me. Everything's about me, right? And so, like, if you live in a society that doesn't give a shit about, hey, how's that person doing? Should we maybe improve the quality of life for the citizens we live around? And it's just about me, right? Well, then you could just step on people's backs and climb to the top and ascend that way. And that's how the society is structured, right? We don't give a fuck about ethics or any of that kind of stuff. Not even a little. Which is essentially what took me into economics, so that I could look at these guys and say credibly, you guys know I could save you money, right? But then I've come to realize that it's not about the money, right? That they actually do want to torture people. That's what it is actually about. It was pretty disgusting seeing people here expecting Asians to venerate their vets when they colonized them and bombed Vietnam and Korea. Yeah, no shit, eh? Like, venerate them for what, exactly? Like, I at least there's, like, something of an argument to be made in post-World War II. Although, I got a good article here for this. Right? The business dynasties who benefited from Nazis. Generation Y me, how you doing? How many crimes could there have been done by the Canadian military in Afghanistan if there's so much coming out about what happens in the Canadian military? Like, within that military, what officers do to other officers? Yeah, that's a good point, dude. That's actually a real good point. Podcast description: dehumanizing world of scientific management where biz gurus and middle managers view workers as resources and where a cult-like devotion to productivity has invaded all of life. If interested, listen after John's show, of course. Post Carbon Institute Crazy Town podcast. Got some advertising going on in chat. Fantastic. Yeah, fantastic. I'm glad that there's lots of people. Baudrillard, I don't know who this is, but described capitalism as an excrescent system. Yeah. Trickle-down economics equals for $1, I get 99 cents for having my name on the building, and you get 1 cent for doing everything. Yeah. The article does raise an important question. Why is it before central banks there was deflation, but since 1913 with central banks, there has only been constant inflation? I mean, it's just price gouging at this point, right? Like, just the steady gouging of okay, I want to read this one. This is the one I want to read. From The Guardian. You guys know me, right? I have said over and over and over again that the Americans were allied to the Nazis during World War II until the very end, right? Until it was obvious the Nazis lost, and then they would turn around. Here's an article that sort of explores that idea. Not directly, but you'll see what I'm getting into. People should be more aware. The business dynasties who benefited from the Nazis. In his new book, Nazi Billionaires, David DeJong explores the damning history of companies who have refused to examine their murky histories with Hitler. Colonial and Confederate statues toppled. Looted objects returned by contrite museums. Tainted family names, such as Sackler, expunged from buildings. A worldwide reckoning with the past crimes of great powers is underway. But is there a glaring omission? A new book, Nazi Billionaires, investigates how Germany's richest business dynasties made fortunes by aiding and abetting Adolf Hitler's Third Reich. It also examines how 8 decades later, they still escape close scrutiny, and a nation that has done so much to confront its catastrophic past still suffers a very particular blind spot. What struck me was this is a country that's so cognizant of its histories in many ways, but seemingly the most economically powerful actors do not engage with that, says author David DeJong, a 35-year-old Dutchman. That was the reason why I wrote the book. It's an argument in favor of historical transparency. The former reporter for Bloomberg News examines German companies that own beer brewers and wine producers, as well as famous U.S. brands such as Krispy Kreme and Pret-a-Manager. But he casts an especially harsh light on car markets, led by household names such as BMW and Porsche, which powered the post-war economic miracle and contribute about 1/10 of the nation's gross domestic product. DeJong tells how the rise of the Nazis was initially met with skepticism and contempt by many business leaders, but some discovered it could be very profitable. Ferdinand Porsche convinced Hitler to put the Volkswagen Beetle into production. The company thrived under his son, Ferry Porsche, who volunteered for the SS, became an officer, and lied about it for the rest of his days. Ferry Porsche designed the first Porsche sports car and surrounded himself with former SS members in the 50s and 60s. The steel, coal, and arms magnate, Friedrich Flick, was convicted at Nuremberg of using forced and slave labor, bankrolling the SS, and looting a steel factory. But he was released in 1960 and eventually became controlling shareholder of Daimler-Benz, then Germany's biggest car manufacturer. Deutsche Bank bought the Flick conglomerate in 1985, turning his descendants into billionaires. Perhaps no one better encapsulates de Jong's argument than Günter Quandt and his son, Herbert Quandt, members of the Nazi Party and patriarchs of the family that now dominates the BMW Group. Herbert Quandt had responsibility over battery factories in Berlin, where thousands of forced and enslaved laborers toiled, including hundreds of women from concentration camps. He acquired companies stolen from Jews in France and used prisoners of war and forced laborers on his own private estate. He even built a concentration subcamp in Nazi-occupied Poland. When Günter Quandt was 37 and widowed, he met and married a 17-year-old called Magda Friedlander and had one child with her. After their divorce, Magda married the Nazi propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels, with whom she murdered their 6 children before both killed themselves in 1945. After the war, Günter Quandt was arrested for suspected collaboration with the Nazis, only to be acquitted after falsely claiming that he had been forced to join the party by Goebbels. Günter Quandt becomes one of Nazi Germany's most successful industrialists, de Jong, who has been reporting from the families for a decade, said in a phone interview from Palm Springs, California. He was already immensely wealthy before Hitler seized power. He uses it at the end of the war as a way of saying, "I was a victim of persecution. I was persecuted by Joseph Goebbels and by my ex-wife." Herbert Quandt inherited vast wealth from his father and saved BMW from bankruptcy, becoming the company's biggest shareholder. 2 of his children, Stefan Quandt and Suzanne Klatten, are now Germany's wealthiest family, with close to major control of the BMW Group, large holdings in the chemical and technology industries, and a net worth of about $38 billion. They and other dynasties are celebrated for turning Germany into an economic powerhouse, with buildings, foundations, and prizes bearing their names. The skeletons in their cupboards are not a secret, but nor are they well known or accounted for. Acknowledgement remains an afterthought, despite Germany's much vaunted remembrance culture. Some have taken baby steps towards transparency. The Quandts commissioned a study in 2011 to look into their shameful past. Changes have been made to corporate websites, but only, de Jong charges, grudgingly and incrementally, with important details omitted. Stefan Quandt still gives out an annual media prize named after his father, and works from headquarters named after his grandfather. De Jong, who found family members unwilling to be interviewed other than one London-based heir, says, "You have BMW and Porsche, particularly the families that control them, conduct this whitewashing or leaving out the history, where they celebrate the business successes of their founders or saviors, but leave out the fact that these men committed war crimes." I never got an answer, whether it's because they are afraid it would hurt the bottom line or share prices of the company to be fully transparent about the history, or whether it's just because they derived their entire identity from the successes that their grandfathers and fathers had, and by being transparent about them, it's kind of disavowing their own identity. It's probably a combination of the both. The families tend to lean on Germans' notion of collective guilt, de Jong continues, but it's very perverse, where you now have the BMW Foundation Herbert Quandt, which has a model to inspire responsible leadership in the name of a man who, yes, saved BMW from bankruptcy in 1959, but also designed and built and dismantled a concentration subcamp in Nazi-occupied Poland. At a bare minimum, what we can expect from these companies and families is historical transparency. In his book, De Jong notes that an international drive for such transparency and its attendant reckonings have brought down statues of Confederate generals, slave traders, and Christopher Columbus, and heralded the rechristening of colleges named after racist presidents. Yet, this movement towards facing the past is somehow bypassing many of Germany's legendary businessmen, he writes. Their dark legacy remains hidden in plain sight. This book, in some small way, tries to right that wrong. The author, now based in Tel Aviv, Israel, adds, I hope people will become more aware on a consumer level that the money they spend on these products might end up as dividends for these families, and might go towards the maintaining of foundations, corporate headquarters, and media properties in the name of Nazi war criminals. I think people should be more aware of these histories and of history in general, particularly when it comes to consumption and the continuing whitewashing of history by these consumer brands and families that control them. And this is happening in Germany. So forget about any conversation about what companies like IBM, who was responsible for creating the concentration camp punch card system, right? That the concentration camps in Nazi Germany wouldn't have been effective if not for IBM, right? Forget about that. Forget about Coca-Cola selling products in Nazi Germany at the time, right? Forget about any of these major corporations involving themselves in the goings-on of Nazi Germany, right? We just don't talk about that shit. We just don't talk about that shit. Here's a spot of good news. Officers should use discretion over stealing to eat, says police watchdog. The cost of living crisis will trigger an increase in crime, and officers should use their discretion when deciding whether to prosecute people who steal in order to eat, the new chief inspector of constabulary has said. The impact of poverty and the impact of lack of opportunity for people does lead to an increase in crime. There's no two ways about it, Andy Cook said as inflation hit a 40-year high of 9%. When asked how policing could avoid being seen as an arm of an uncaring state, he said forces across England and Wales were skilled in dealing with the tensions and dynamics of their communities. What they've got to bear in mind is what the best thing for the community and that individual in the way that they deal with those issues. And I certainly fully support police officers using their discretion, and they need to use discretion more often. Cook said he was not advocating an amnesty for people who commit crimes of poverty, nor giving a carte blanche for people to go out shoplifting. Instead, he advised officers to make sure such matters of law enforcement are dealt with in the best way possible. Literally just pass a basic income, you guys. Come on. Stop being dorks. Stop being dorks. That's all it is at this point. These guys are dorks. They're just loser dorks. Just being well, I don't know. I'm not hemming and hawing about maybe should we solve the problem? I don't know. Did they earn it? Shut the fuck up. Shut the fuck up with this, man. It's so it's just getting to be embarrassing at this point. Ugh. Biden just decided to send troops to Somalia because they're a threat. People that can't even afford to buy a camel to transport themselves living in mud huts, for God's sakes. Yeah. The military-industrial complex needs to use those bombs. Right? They can't build more bombs if they don't use them. Right? Yep. Always remember, if you see a shoplifter, no you didn't. That's right. That's right. And, I say that about a lot of things. You see somebody tearing down a statue? No. No, you didn't. You see somebody doing something maybe they shouldn't be doing? No, don't worry about it. Right? You see a coworker being lazy or lackadaisical on the job? No, don't worry about it. Oh, that guy took a half-hour break when he was only supposed to take a 15-minute break. Oh, well, that's fine. There's no reason to participate in this society. This society is abandoning you in major and serious ways. There's literally no reason to participate. Now delve into the likes of Jorg Baborowski and his revitalization of the crimes of Nazis in Germany currently. Oh, yeah. Leave it to the cops. They're cool. Totes won't discriminate. Exactly, Adam. That's exactly what I thought, right? Yeah, because, they're going to see, some, 15-year-old white kid steal, a loaf of bread or something, and they're just going to turn a blind eye. But if that kid's black, for sure they'll just be yeah, we'll just let that off the hook, right? Yeah. Doug Ford, we're all in. Get it done, right? But get what done? Get what done, Dougie? What's Dougie getting done? Right? He's just gonna like build this highway. That's it. Like, it's so stupid. Mocked is right. Let's do the number draw. I missed it at 7. I should have hit it, but I didn't. I'm embarrassed by it. I'm embarrassed. Here we go. Okay, Mocked, today's the day. We're hitting that 7. Let's go.
Here we go for today's number. It's May 18,
got a 1 from Ligandes, 4 from Watson.
2022.
Here we go.
10 balls.
10 balls.
Each
Seraphim
ball
with a 4.
has a number. Numbers 1 through 10.
Numbers 1 through 10. Generation Y me in with a 2. Good to see you, by the way.
Numbers.
Here we go. It's a 7 this time. I can feel it.
Pick a number.
I can feel it. There's 10 people in the chat. There's only 5 numbers out there. Come on, guys.
Today's number is 5.
Fucking bullshit. Fuck, man. He's totally messing with us. That's all. It's David Lynch. He's like completely messing with us. We didn't even get a 5 in the chat. What a disappointing day, man. Today's the worst day ever. Bullshit. Oh well. Can't win them all. I was totally gonna say 5, you guys. I was absolutely totally gonna say 5. It was 5 this time. Just sure, Adam. You win then, bud. You win. Oh, good point, DM. Good point. Didn't feel like picking numbers today. Decided to save your gambling money. Speaking of gambling money, now's a great time to like, share, and subscribe. Let people know I exist out in the world, right? Tell your friends, tell your family, tell your conservative people, and don't forget, give me some money. Money. The money thing. Yeah, money is good. Money. I could use some money. Money would be nice. Nova Scotia in with a late 4. Canada's inflation rate hits three-decade high of 6.8%. Here's that thing that we saw, right? Remember this? Did we see that? We saw that. Yeah, it's here. It's right here. Look, here it is. Doop, doop. Same idea. Same idea. I mean, like, we're being price gouged. I don't know what to say. Like, corporations are using their monopoly status and to gouge prices. Like, does anyone else think anything else is actually happening? Like, that's obviously what's happening. I think that that's true regardless of whether or not you buy into this or not, right? Like, you gotta kind of be a bit dim to not understand that, like, corporations are obviously going to charge you through the roof if they think they can get away with it. And given their monopoly status, like, across the board, of course they're going to do that. Like, of course they're going to jack prices. Like, you think Walmart is worried if some, like, tiny little rinky-dinky, like, corner store starts to charge a lower price for their stuff? No. Right? You think Amazon gives a shit about that? No. Like, we're so fucking and the narrative that's coming out of this from conservatives is that inflation is high and so we have to cut government spending. That is actually what is being said. That the solution for these guys is to destroy the economy, which is what austerity does, right? So, given that Skippy is going to take power soon, like, that's what's going to happen. Because these guys are, like, they're too dumb to figure out that destroying the civil society results in a worse economy, right? Like, we already have the OECD saying that Canada is heading into, like, a decades-long recession, especially when compared to the rest of the world. But if conservatives take power, they're just going to make it worse. When conservatives take power, they're just going to make it way, way worse, right? They're going to make it worse because their solution is the destruction of the civil society, right? Like, that's what austerity is, and it's not anything else but that. It's literally the claim that the best way to build a statue is to destroy the statue, right? That the best way to make a piece of art, like the best way to make a painting, is to destroy the canvas, right? That's the argument of austerity. That if you destroy the canvas, then the free market will just randomly produce the best canvas and painting that can exist, right? Like, if you use the argument of austerity, if you use the logic of austerity for literally anything else, it's obvious that it's stupid. Like, it's really, really obvious. Like, the best way to build a business is to destroy the business. The best way to build an economy is to destroy the economy, right? Like, it's fundamentally stupid. I just made a realization of the difference between communist censorship versus capitalist censorship. Capitalist censorship censors facts in order to maintain their power and spread information. I mean, like, communist censorship just understands that there is such a thing as violent speech, which the society genuinely understands. Like, if you stand up in the middle of a theater and scream fire, right, that's not protected speech. If you incite violence, that's not protected speech. It's just that the communists extend it to things like, if you argue in favor of the enslavement of a people, right, which is what capitalists argue for all the time, this shouldn't be protected. Like, you shouldn't be allowed to stand up and say credibly in the civil society that, like what's going on in the States with this white replacement theory that's coming out of Tucker Carlson, right? Like, absolutely not. Like, that's gross. That's some gross shit right there. Like, this absolutely barbaric, fucking horrific shit that's going to result, and has already resulted in violence. Like, it's obviously going to go that way. I just made a realization. Oh, yeah, I already said that. They've been saying it since the 1930s with the New Deal. Oh, this is just a slippery slope to communism. Oh, the reason why the Depression is so bad is because of the welfare nets. Yeah, like, and if you're still espousing it, then you're just dumb. Like, there's so much evidence, there's so much information, there's so much to the contrary that, like, it really does start to beg the question of, like, it's just gotta be like a racial white supremacy thing. Like, it's really what it's gotta be, because, like, literally, like, you're paying more to maintain the system of poverty. Your solution is to just continue paying more, even more, by destroying the system as it exists so that you can pay more, allow monopolists to take over so that you can pay even more, right? Like, the whole argument of the conservative is to pay more, right? That's really what they want, is to pay more for less service. And it doesn't make any sense at all. And so the only thing that makes it make sense is that they want to pay more to inflict as much suffering as they can because they're fucking white supremacists. There's no other explanation that makes sense. Like, find me the explanation that makes sense. Why would anyone want to spend more for worse service? Like, that's because that's what you're getting. Like, unequivocally. Like, there is, like, the evidence is in. Our own governments have produced this evidence, right? Literal third party funded by corporations. It's exactly like the climate change thing. The oil companies' own scientists are like, yeah, climate change is a problem, and they just fucking ignore it. Like, the suffering is the point. By the way, the UBR march on Saturday was a dud. Only a handful of people showed up. The media did not even care. Look, it's because people know. Like, they know that the government's not going to respond. They know that this isn't going to happen. They're aware of it. And honestly, like, if I wanted to really put a sharp point on it, I'm more and more convinced that the organizers of those protests, of the UBI protests, they're in it for their own careerism. That's what's going on now. Like, the reason why these people are organizing these marches is so that they can show their community, that they're involved in their community, so that they can get voted in as a liberal or something later on in their life. That's what it's about for them. Because if it wasn't, right, then they would be organizing along more serious lines. They'd be like surrounding Doug Ford's house, right? But that's not what they're up to. Like that's not what they're interested in, right? They're interested in playing nice, and the reason why they want to play nice is so that they can get the promotion and get the nod, right? Like, we got to get through that. We got to get over that. Like, and I think people are just demoralized across the board. Take a look at what's going on in Ontarian politics. Right? We're about to elect this fucking fraud, like a literal grifter. Like, not even just like, well, I disagree with him, but no, like a straight up huckster con man who is obviously running a grift. Like, and it's an obvious grift. Like, straight up, like, I'm going to cut a bunch of services and privatize those services. Then I will sit on the board of directors of those services and reap in profits for doing nothing whatsoever. Mike Harris did exactly the same thing, right? It's such an obvious grift, and they're going to get voted in for a second term. Like, I can't imagine a more embarrassing moment, like, for a populace than to vote for, like, a literal straight up, just like, hey, how you doing, buddy? Have I got some snake oil to sell you? Hey, I've got a bridge. Here's the deed for the bridge. You want to buy it? Like, literally, this is what, like, I respect and understand why you fell for the con the first time, okay? Like, we were all upset with McGuinty and Wynne and the privatization of Hydro One, right? We were upset with all of that. Absolutely. The populace was obviously angling to get, right? Yeah, what's worse, I hear from people that Ford's done a good job. Yeah, just the most gullible, rubish bullshit you can possibly imagine. Ford's done a good job. Their electric bill is higher now. Like, that's the thing. Ford's done it. When? How? Where? When? At what time? Like, when? Like, and literally I've said this to these guys. Ford's done a great job. When? And then that's what happens. They just short out. Like, because they just, like, don't live in a fact-based reality any longer, right? They've retreated into their houses and into their suburban lifestyle. And if you actually confront them with even the most meager of facts, just does not compute. Like, he gave us bucket. I mean, he followed through on the bucket beer promise in, like, the most possible technical way. I think he produced, like, enough so that, like, if you were in the right place at the right time, you could get this piss swill for $1. Like, no, but, like, he hasn't actually followed through on any of his promises. He hasn't actually followed through on the things he said he wouldn't do, he did, right? So he's like a liar both ways, right? He didn't do the things he said he was going to do, and he did the things he said he wouldn't do. And that's, like, across the board. And I can't imagine a more devastating thing to do for a populace than to walk in to a plan where an economy is actually being built. This is the green policies that were passed by the previous liberals. And instead of just, like, you know, taking a look at the ones you didn't like and maybe getting rid of those, and instead of, like, cutting off some stuff or any of that kind of stuff, literally just sweeping them aside, right? Literally sweeping them aside. It's put us decades behind. I can't, like, it's hard to find a more reckless decision than that one, right? Like, you talk about, like Ontarians talk about, like, the NDP government that happened here in Ontario as if it was a disaster. This Ford government is the biggest disaster it's ever seen. Like, literally, there are going to be other places that are going to be 30 years ahead of us while we're picking up the pieces from this failed idea, right? Like, it's just a total failure. Yeah, he won't increase ODSP in his second term. He'll just tell him, pull up your wheelchairs, bootstraps, get a job. Yeah, that's what he says now, right? He says that now. The Fraser Institute is upset. Who cares what the Fraser Institute says? you talk about the frauds, right? Like the fraud, like the most illiterate frauds that exist in the society are the Fraser Institute. Like literally, they are like, if I'm reading an article and then the article seriously uses the Fraser Institute as a citation, I just close it. Just like, oh, okay. I don't need, there's no knowledge there. Like, there's nothing worth reading. Like, the Fraser Institute is just like the Dunder's Dunder, right? Like, if I see the Fraser Institute on someone's CV, I'm like, oh, you're like the opposite of intelligent. Like, oh, and the problem is that you actually think you have an education. So it's going to take forever to get you to a place where you actually realize how fucked up you are. Yeah, Ford is the culmination of the societal failures of Harris, Eves, McGuinty, Wynne. Yeah, like, and there's a lot of that Trump energy as well, where, like, if people are feeling slighted, they're going to use people like Ford as a way to just, like, throw cogs into the wheel. But the difference between what was going on in America and what was going on here in Ontario is that things were actually happening in Ontario. Like, you could gripe about your hydro bill and the privatization of Hydro One, and you should, right? Obviously. But it's not like the Liberals were doing nothing. It's not like they were running this obvious con, right? Like, the McGuinty Wynne Liberals made the concessions that they made to the ownership class because that was the compromise, right? They didn't want to confront the ownership class directly. They didn't want to say to the ownership class, hey, get fucked, right? They wanted to work with the ownership class, and so they found a compromise. And the compromise was, okay, we're going to get you guys to invest in a bunch of green energy projects and a bunch of, to transition to a green economy, right? To get away from fossil fuels, to do this kind of stuff. And we're going to give you a bunch of sweetheart deals for it, right? So it was a compromise with the capitalist death cult, right? But it was working, right? Like, sure, it was illegitimate. Sure, it was bullshit. Sure, it had all the hallmarks of the same kind of capitulation that we see to capitalists all the time. But it was working. The bottom line is that it was working. That the McGuinty government and the Wynne government reduced emissions in this province by as much as 90% in some districts, right? It was working. It was doing its job, right? And now emissions are going up 400% under Ford, right? And in another term of Doug Ford, and we'll basically have eradicated all of the benefits that the Liberals got us with their concessions. So, like, again, I understand why people would vote for Ford in the first place. Like, one term of Ford makes sense to me. This second term, no, it's irredeemable. Like, if I found out that you voted Ford in this election, I just am not going to talk to you. You're not my friend. You're not redeemable. I think you're scummy. Like, I think you're a scummy bad person. It's as simple as that, right? Like, and like, sell all your property, give it to the poor. That's the only way you redeem yourself in my eyes. Like, gross. Yeah, and meanwhile, NDP Ontario cozies up to a pro-Israel, anti-progressive racists. Isn't that fun? Right? Beneath Birth is a racist, anti-left-wing organization that all progressives should shun. The fact that the Ontario NDP would smear an internationalist social justice-minded movement to gain favor with this anti-Palestinian group is unconscionable. Over the past 18 months, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, Al-Haq, B'Tselem Sem, and UN Special Rapporteur on Palestinians have all concluded that Israel is guilty of the crime of apartheid. Yet, B'nai B'rith openly calls itself a staunch defender of the state of Israel. Like, the NDP just keeps shooting itself in its own ass, man. Like, it just keeps shooting itself in its own ass. Like, it's not a leftist organization. It's just not. By the way, wonder what impact the Ontario Party will be in rural areas. They seem to be the provincial arm of the PPC. I don't think that is accurate. From what I've seen of the Ontario Party. Is that the right party? Is that the party that I'm thinking of? Oh, this is Derek Sloan. Yeah. Sorry, I was thinking of a different party. I was thinking of there's another party which is like the True Blue. That's what I was thinking of. Yeah, Derek Sloan. That's all you need to know, right? This guy's a fascist. Like, this guy's a straight up fascist. Like, there's no other way to describe him, right? Like, he literally gets kicked out of the Conservative Party for being a fascist. Like, I don't know. I don't know what you need. Like, he told the Minister of Health to go back to China, and making allegedly racist remarks. Yeah, telling an Asian woman to go back to China is racist. Like, the fact that this guy is in politics at all is disturbing. It's disturbing that anyone would put a piece of paper in a box with his name on it. Like, it's very, very despicable. Like, it's right that this person gets expelled from the caucus, right? And but of the Mises Institute, I don't actually know the Mises Institute. Like, but the Fraser Institute, it's obviously just like billionaires trying to convince you that they're credible or legitimate, right? Legit, the conservatives are always destructive. They destroy whatever was done before them in the name of cutbacks. Yeah. Like, I mean, at least when Stephen Harper came in, his cuts had a type of sense, right? They had a type of logic, right? The Ford cuts are just like straight up like destructive for no reason. Constant disappointment from the NDP. However, today I went to an Acorn protest and the NDP were the only ones there. No Greens. Too bad as Mike won the debate. Yeah, Mike, I mean, I don't think he'll pick up much. Like, he's not going to get an extra seat or anything. But, like, his voice is the voice that's needed, right? That he's spitting the truth. Like, he's telling the truth, right? He's doing good work that way. Comes from the same area as Randy Hillier. Yeah, enough said. But, like, yeah, anyway. Enough about these gross fucking fascists. Climate, the time for incrementalism is over. No shit, right? Like, no shit. Like, no shit. Like, no fucking shit, right? Like, I don't know what it is gonna take. Like, it just feels like we're stuck in a torpor. It feels like we're stuck, and that people are just like, oh well, what are you gonna do? It's like, what are you gonna do? There are very obvious and clear things that we can do, right? Dow drops more than 1,000 points. Retailers' profits crushed by inflation. Price gouging. Yeah, I mean, like, let's get through all this. I might put this right at the end. Adam, you said at the beginning, a history of sexuality. I don't know why you wanted me to look that up, but I'm happy to go through it. Market-based measure, yeah, we did this, we did that. Progressive conservatives, yeah, it's... Like, come on. We really are this dumb, eh? Like, we really are this dumb. Mike Morris for the Green Party, probably the best politician for the people. Well, he's certainly, like, the conscience of the left, right? Like, he has forced the New Democrats to actually adopt a couple of positions. Like, the Liberals came out and said, we're going to raise ODSP by 20%. And the New Democrats, I think, said, like, about the same. And Greens basically were, we're going to double them, right? And so the New Democrats adopted it. How are the Libs at 28%? Because that's how Canadians are. That's all. That's how Canadians are. Got to vote Liberal or else the Conservative gets in. Got to vote. Don't want to split the vote. No, if you split the vote between the Democrat and the Liberal, then the Conservative gets in. So you got to vote Liberal or else the Conservative gets in. That's it. Like, that's all there is to it. Like, it's a major failing of our political system that such a problem exists. That ranked ballots, such as the type of system that the Conservatives use in their own caucuses, would resolve this issue. It would be easy to implement. You literally it would take 2 seconds. Literally just like put a 1 beside the person you want, put a 2 beside your second choice, put a 3 and then a 4, right? And then as people get chased out, then the ballots get redistributed. right? And it gives you a better. And so then, if you want to vote green, right, but you don't want the conservative to get in, well, then you would go like 1 and then 2 and then 3 and then 4. And so then as the green votes get counted, all the ones, and then it's obvious they're not going to get into power. So then those ones become 2s. And then if that continues, then it's 3s, and then finally 4s, right? NMPR would be a better option. Yeah, we can have that debate. My brother actually had a really, and I think I agree with his position, which is like, the truth is that it comes down to engagement. That if that it doesn't actually matter that much how your system is structured, right? Like, what really matters is engagement with it. That that the people who are voting conservative, these people here, right? They are voting conservative because they're fucking conservative. Friendly Geordies? I don't know what friendly Geordies means. No, of course there's criticisms of the system. There's always going to be criticisms of the system. But in terms of eliminating the first past the post problem, which I don't even know why I bother talking about it. Like, no politician's ever going to do it. Like, why would they mess with a system that's electing them, right? So they're never going to do it. Yeah, more infinite money for war. You can get fucked, right? Inflation rate 31 high. Yeah, no one's going to do anything about it. Climate change burning us down. Yeah, Dow drops more than 1,000 points. Yeah. It turns out that if you impoverish your nation, they can't buy anything, and your businesses don't function. Oh, shocker. Biden says white supremacy is a poison coursing through the U.S. while he funds Nazis in Ukraine. Got it. Stephen Del Duca says he's the only leader who can beat Doug Ford. Can he convince voters? Right, this is that kind of classic manufacturing consent, right? Like, you're seeing a bit of a push going on in the media now to the liberals and to Del Duca. Just being like, and honestly, I gotta be straightforward with you though. I do think that Del Duca did put on a pretty good performance at the debate. I think that if you are the type of person to watch those debates in order to suss out which way you were going to go, if you're one of these undecideds, I could see a lot of people swinging to Del Duca based on his performance. Like, he really put ground the gears of Doug Ford, right? There was like one moment where he was like really extolling Doug Ford, and I was just like, that's right, that's what you got to be doing, right? So we'll see how it goes. Still time. I hope that it ends up being a tie. A literal tie, down to the number. I hope it's like literally like a million votes to a million votes dead on the money. And then we'll have to like flip a coin or something. Yeah, no shit from the Financial Post. Workers increasingly disgruntled with their jobs say they're just in it for the money. What? Holy shit, really? People are just in it for the money? Like we've been told to be this whole fucking time? Like, I don't understand. Like... And I'm more or less of the opinion that, like, if you are working... Especially these, like, office jobs, right? Like, work slowly. Like, be a drain on this on the thing, right? You might as well. Like, they're not paying you, right? Like, you're like, I don't know, look at TikTok as often as you can, right? Like just like, I don't know why anybody would ever believe that this, like, you're definitely going to get the promotion. You're definitely going to have, it's definitely going to happen for you. Just, all you got to do is work twice as hard and everything will be fine. Nah, do the opposite of that. Work slower. Take your time, right? Like, make them fucking fire you. Make them get in your fucking business. Make them do it, right? And, like, just keep grinding down as much productivity as you possibly can, right? This society needs to grind to a halt. It needs to grind to a fucking halt. Like, the federal libs wanted a ranked ballot as their chosen form of democratic reform. I mean, yeah, but they weren't even willing to do that. He's an Australian comedian, Friendly Geordies. He does a bunch of stuff against their version of conservatism. My favorite Australian comedians that I'm seeing on YouTube is this is the Australian government, honest government ads. Those guys are great. Biden leaning into identity-first postmodernism instead of the class issues that are the foundation of these issues. Yeah. Well, I mean, he obviously doesn't give a shit. He obviously doesn't care. Like, oh, here's one I actually wanted to read. I'm kind of interested about this one. Capitalism is dead. The future is solar punk. Solar punk provides hope in an age of darkness. It is a bright vision of the future. A future we will have to fight for. Don't you feel like there is something inherently wrong with the world? That this is not how it's supposed to be? That something, it's difficult to say what exactly, is missing? Poverty, inequality, discrimination, hunger, disease, war, estrangement from people and nature, isolation, the rise of mental illness, suicides, pollution, mind-numbing and useless office jobs, the destruction of the environment, and countless other terrifying social issues. Capitalists are trying to convince us that we are living in the best possible world, that this is how it's supposed to be, that if we just wait a little longer, things will become much better, and there will be peace and prosperity for everyone. Things will not become better, and nothing will change. Politicians and the system that sustains and feeds them have proven that over and over again. If we want the world to change, if we want a better future for us, for our children, for future generations, then we will have to take things into our own hands. There are more of us than there are of them. It's time for a solar punk revolution. In the following 4 chapters, I will try to define and explain what exactly solar punk is and how it can improve our lives. To achieve this, we first have to discuss the prevalent dystopian visions that surround us in all forms of media. After that, we will take a look at how our current reality differs from these dystopias and how fiction, in fact, influences how we perceive and design our own society. In the last chapter, I will lay out the absolute basics of solar punk. These will serve as a starting point for subsequent articles, in which I will discuss how we can build a solar punk society from scratch, and what we all can do to support this vision. But first, let's take a look at some not-so-happy visions of the future. Dark visions of the future. Typically, science fiction stories depict depressing and dystopian visions of the future. In the most traditional cases, they paint a future in which people travel through space and discover new stars and galaxies. More or less interesting adventures and shenanigans ensue. However, not all science fiction stories are set in space. There are also numerous subgenres that stage their dramas on boring old Earth. Cyberpunk may be the most popular of these. These subgenres depict different versions of the future, which are mainly expressed through new technologies and the resulting social changes. Sometimes humans have solved the mysteries of artificial intelligence and are threatened by it. Other times robots are rebelling against us. And in still other cases, clones or other spawns of genetic engineering gone wrong are turning the world upside down. There are numerous possibilities, the majority of which are interpreted as dangerous and threatening. Technological and scientific advancements are only one component of these imaginary futures. The social aspect is far more intriguing. How do people live in the future? How do they treat each other? How does their economy work? How and do they work? In each sci-fi scenario, these questions are answered differently. However, the societies they portray are almost always depicted as dystopian, rather than utopian. Solar punk is the exact opposite, but more on that later. First, we will examine the dystopia we already live in. The real dystopia. Cyberpunk, one of the most popular science fiction genres, is typically very dystopian. Usually it depicts a devastated hyper-capitalist world, shaped by cyber prosthetics, artificial intelligence, bright advertisements, a futuristic immersive kind of internet, and neon lights. Neon lights everywhere. However, cyberpunk is guided even more by the society it represents. This society is characterized by a stark disparity between rich and poor. Poor people are frequently no longer even considered real citizens, and are denied access to medical care, education, and other services. This world is primarily ruled by megacorporations that wield the real power. Governments, if they exist at all, are often just their puppets. People mostly live to work for and be exploited by these corporations. They are really no better than slaves. Meanwhile, the unbridled pursuit of profits is wreaking havoc on the environment. Some people have forgotten what trees look like. Is there anything you realized while reading these paragraphs? How dystopian are these scenarios? Is our current reality that far removed from such a vision? The truth is that much of it no longer sounds dystopian, but rather familiar. The wealth gap is massive and growing. Millions of people lack access to medical care and other basic necessities, and many are expected to live for their job and give everything for their company, while at the same company destroys the environment and exploits people in distant and not so distant lands. Politics is infested with corporate influence, lobbyism, and greed. Thousands die in useless wars, fueled by power-hungry psychopaths. We are not envisioning a dystopia. We are living it. We just got used to it. Fiction becomes reality. Our reality is heavily influenced by artistic and fictional depictions of the future. Even though science fiction has long been a niche genre, it has always played an important role in shaping and defining expectations. Science fiction is just a reflection of how we imagine the future. We expect new technologies, like new phones, which can do the same things as older models but marginally better, or new TVs. 8K is so much better than 4K, and cars. Yes, you definitely need this giant SUV in this city to have a certain aesthetic. This aesthetic is significantly influenced by how these things are depicted in science fiction media, including dystopian ones. It's not too far-fetched to predict that we will indeed have high-tech prosthesis and nanorobots. We're not that far away. That we will develop artificial intelligence. We are closer than people think. That companies will rule our world. Actually, that one's already come to pass. And that the internet will continue to evolve to become more immersive and more invasive. The metaverse revolution is already underway. All hail Mark Zuckerberg, our ruler and master. Is it going too far to say that the dystopian portrayal of society has at least accustomed us to the idea that our society will become the same? That these fictional worlds create a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy? Perhaps this is, in fact, one of our main issues. And perhaps this is why we need more attention for a genre that is heading in an entirely different direction. A new movement that not only wants to tell fictional stories to make people feel better, but aims to revolutionize the world and change it for the better. That movement is called solarpunk. Solarpunk is a bright, optimistic, and hopeful concept of the future. As the name implies, it is a vision in which people live on the basis of sustainable technologies and highly developed renewable energies, such as solar or wind power. Humanity lives in harmony with its surroundings. We are no longer parasites who exploit nature until all resources are depleted. Instead, we live in synergy with our planet. Looking at artistic solarpunk interpretations, one typically sees cities overgrown with green plants that blend in perfectly with their natural surroundings. Solarpunk is about harmony, peace, and happiness, both with nature and with one fellow human beings. In short, it is what we all desire, but are too afraid to imagine. Not only are the technologies and the infrastructure in a solarpunk future sustainable, but society is also depicted in a much more optimistic light. It is usually one with very little or no hierarchy. There is no shortages in this society, not even artificial ones created by mysterious market forces, and nobody goes hungry or is homeless. In general, a solarpunk society is one that has risen above poverty. Capitalism has instilled in us the terrible notion that poverty and inequality are somehow natural and cannot be avoided, that some people are worth less than others. It is constantly creating new needs, which it aims to fulfill in exchange for money. A constant stream of useless products and bullshit that do not make us happy in any way. Don't you feel exhausted by this world? Do you not feel in the deepest parts of your being that this is not natural? That this is not how we are supposed to live? That something is missing? I am convinced that humanity can progress beyond such things, beyond artificial inequalities, beyond poverty, beyond the tyranny of money. I am indeed absolutely sure that we can free ourselves from the reign of the rich and powerful and create a better world altogether. Capitalism has failed us all. It has failed to deliver on the promises it made at the beginning of the 20th century. There is no peace. There is no prosperity for all. It is time to try something new. All it takes is a little revolution. In subsequent articles, I will explain how we can successfully build a solar punk society, what this movement entails, the challenges we will face, and how you, yes you, reading this, can support the revolution. Subscribe to avoid missing out on new articles and use my referral link to become a Medium member and get unlimited access to all my work, etc., etc. It's good to know there are people out there thinking about it. It makes sense. Like, the thing I dream about all the time is if I could get my hands on an electric vehicle that had solar panels installed in it, I could literally just travel around, just doing like this live stream on the road, right? Like just trying to find a Wi-Fi signal, right? Just driving around, parking it, right? Just getting enough money to buy food, right? Traveling around the world, documenting the world, looking at places, looking at things. I would just need to get access to the car. That would be the big expense. It would just be the electric vehicle with the solar panels, right? I don't understand why we can't do that. Like, I've never, I obviously understand why the capitalists would not want to sell vehicles with solar panels attached, right? Because the last thing they want is to create a system that they can no longer meter, right? That's the last thing they want. All right. That article inspired me to sing. You guys know the words. Sing along at home. Got asked a question by my niece who's 5 years old. What's the world gonna be like when I'm grown? I looked up at the crimson smoke-filled sky. I thought, what's the harm in telling one more lie? I said, everybody's safe, no one's living in the streets. You never need to worry if you're gonna get to Eden. Antarctica is covered in ice, and everybody's happy, and wouldn't that be nice? The burning sun won't leave a paper trail. Why work so hard if it's too big to fail? And what's the point of feeding this machine if it won't make the world in our dreams where everybody's safe, no one's living in the streets? You never need to worry if you're gonna get to Eden. Antarctica is covered in ice. everybody's happy, and wouldn't that be nice? And I know one day my maker I will meet, when death's sweet kiss comes and sweeps me off my feet. I hope by then we've learned a little more. I'd like this place to be better than before, so everybody's safe, no one's living in the streets. You never need to worry if you're gonna get to eat. And Antarctica is covered in ice. Yeah, everybody's safe, no one's living in the streets. You never need to worry if you're gonna get to eat. Antarctica is covered in ice. Antarctica is covered in and I believe that we can do it. Even now, I still believe that we can do it. The earth created us. We forget that. We don't like to think about it. We don't realize it. We like to think that we're in charge or we're in control, or it'll take some grand act of humanity in order to restabilize the system. But the system created itself. We didn't create it. We didn't make the garden. We didn't create the circumstances for life to evolve on this planet. That was done for us by the system itself. And such a system is more than capable of healing itself. That our interaction with it at this moment is one of a parasitic organism. And all we have to do, if we want to be around to see the absolute miracle of the earth healing itself, is stop. That any of the problems that are created from us doing so will be much easier to confront than the problems that we will face continuing what we're doing. It will be easier for us to clean up our room and clean up our act than it will be to face the wrath of the Earth Mother. Solar panels on a car ain't gonna work. Why? I don't get it. Like, if I have solar panels on the car and it charges up a battery and that battery makes my car go, right? Like, I might need to, like, park and, like, stop driving for a moment to charge up the battery. Why doesn't it work? I don't understand. Like, it just seems like it should. You know what I mean? Like, why wouldn't it? Like, it might not work for, like, long haul trucking or like diesel powered, like, super ships or whatever in the now space. But, like, why wouldn't solar panels on a car, like a little smart car? Like, it was just like a little tiny car. right? Like, I don't understand. I feel like it should. You know what I mean? Like, you know why I feel like it should? Because I used to work in toy stores, right? Like for 5 years I worked at a toy store. And they're solar powered, like battery powered like little cars. Like, hold on. Solar powered car. Will it work? The term solar powered panel vehicle is generally used to describe any vehicle with solar cells integrated into the design. I mean, but they're doing it. Like, they're doing the thing. They're doing the very thing that I was just saying. Look, there's a bunch. Overall, solar is an area that suffers from a lack of collective investment, right? That we've seen in electric batteries and hydrogen more recently. It's almost like companies started to get excited about solar in the early 2010s, but then abruptly pivoted to far more lucrative electric batteries. It's easy to feel jaded about sun-powered cars. There's not enough collective interest in bringing the same level of investment as other EV solutions. Good luck scaling. Yeah. But I feel like that's something that's always been said of solar, right? That solar, like 20 years ago, when I was like a kid, people were like, solar energy, yeah, good luck scaling, right? Like, it doesn't, but like, as countries like China's the leader, have been actually investing in the technology and have actually been researching it, technology has improved, and it's improved dramatically. It's improved very quickly. And so, like, I'm always like, what we should have done 20 years ago, and get a mule. Yeah, I see where you're coming from, Adam. I see where you're coming from. But what we should have done forever ago is, like, forget these worthless capitalists. Like, forget about that. Like, we should fund a crowned corporation and literally put a bunch of scientists in a room and just say, research solar. Find out crazy shit about solar. Make solar better. Just go. And fuck everything up and make mistakes. Right? But we're just so stupid. Decades, centuries are you going to do into the planet? Yeah, exactly. That's the reason why the electric car thing doesn't actually work. If you want to get down to the nuts and brass about, from what I've seen, Adam, is the amount of copper that you need, right? The amount of copper that you need, it's already made it no, so that you can't do it. Like, you need so much copper to get it done. John, what if it's a rainy all week? Then you can't radicalize people and reinforce your communist propaganda. So you can overthrow the freedom's country and proclaim the new DP. What the fuck is what is happening, Mock? John, what if it's a rainy all week? Then you can't radicalize people and reinforce your communist propaganda. Oh, I see what you're saying. If I was driving the solar vehicle, so you can't overthrow freedoms of the country, proclaim the new PR, and leave America. Yeah, without its main asset. Yeah, you're right, dude. You gotta take the good, take the bad, right? Like, if it rains all week, I'd be in real trouble, right? That's the same problem with the small modular reactors, the nukes. They're follow fuel supply, so we gotta yeah. Like, they're just what we actually, like, if I wanted to actually, like, get out of the, like, dream world, right, and come into the real world, because, like, having a solar car and driving around and, like, and treating this, like, having, like, a solar powered RV, that's like a dream, right? It's just like a fantasy. Like, we need to actually have a real war economy. That's what it's really going to come down to. That we are going to have leadership. We are going to have a general consensus amongst the populace that what needs to be done is we need to confront climate change as if it is a war. And we need to take the energy that we're putting into the war machine and focus it into the climate change issue. And we're going to have to ask people very straightforwardly, very straightforwardly, no bullshit, no nothing. We're going to have to look them dead in the eye and say straight to them, you have to sacrifice. You have to. There's the same way that our grandparents sacrificed when they went and fought and died against the Nazis. You're going to have to put your toys in the toy box. It's going to have to be that way. And we're going to find out pretty quickly if we are a culture that's capable of acting like responsible adults. Because right now we're not. Right now we're literally playing with toys to death. That's what we're doing. And our solutions are make better toys. Make more efficient toys. Like, what we actually have to do is tell people, park your cars. Here's the amount of money you need to get the food and to get the shelter and to get all that kind of stuff, right? Bye capitalists. You suck. This is your problem. You created it. We don't expect you to be a part of the solution. Goodbye. And we need to restructure the economy in major and serious ways, with a policy of degrowth, de-escalation, right? To get off of fossil fuels. And we need to have a strong state that actually takes control of this, because we're going to have to make critical decisions about where we can spend fossil fuel energy, where we can use the last of our oil reserves. Like, we can't just flip the switch off for agriculture, right? Like, literally starve everybody. Like, that's not going to happen. But you know what we can do? We can make so fucking Jeff Bezos doesn't shoot a rocket at space every fucking month, right? We can shut that dumb bullshit down. We can get rid of LOL dolls. We can get rid of plastic in our dumb, like, children's toys and in, like, commercial goods or whatever. We can tell these worthless parasitic capitalists to, like, yeah, stop using plastic, use glass. Like, use things that are actually not fossil fuel intensive, right? But we're not gonna. Yeah, end of the fossil fuel era means Stone Age. Hopefully we can live like hobbits. Hopefully we can give land back and indigenous can live how they want. Well, I mean, like, what's annoying about it? I am more or less of the perspective that we are going to, like, we are going to decline as a technological society. That fossil fuel, but what fossil fuels has shown us, right, and the usage of the fossil fuels has shown us is that it is possible to achieve amazing things. That oil was this Pandora's box, right? It was like the Prometheus fire in a way, where it unlocked these amazing abilities and this amazing thing that we could do, and these superpowers that we didn't previously have. But we are going to go into a period of time where those superpowers are no longer going to be available. And they're going to be no longer available because we're running out of the fuel, right? The technology is there. Like, we've got the engine. We just don't have the fuel, and we're running out of it. And more, even more importantly than that, than the running out of it, is that it's killing us. So, but it did give us this taste. It did give us this moment, a very fleeting, very brief moment, where we attained where the idea of space colonization doesn't seem like just a pipe dream. Where we're sitting here going, oh, like, it is possible. We can get into space. We can land on other planets. The idea of creating a moon base, the idea of colonizing space, these are not fanciful ideas to us. That we are sitting here going like, no, we can do it. But unfortunately, we've only been given a taste of it. And unless we use our oil and our fossil fuels in order to transition over to other forms of energy, to other forms, then yeah, we are going to go back to a Stone Age period. We are going to do that. And I suspect, because like, one of the things that's definitely happening is that while we have been wasting our time completely here in North America, China has not. Like, that thing that I said, where I said take a bunch of people and just put them in a room and tell them to improve solar, that's exactly what China did. China grabbed a bunch of people, put them in a room and said, make solar better. And they did, right? And it didn't take them long, right? They just had to do it, right? They just had to do it. And they're still making solar better. And in 10 years' time, well, and this is the other thing. Like, I've listened to Tony Seba. He's an economist, right? Tony Seba is just like, if we were rational, which we're not, but if we were rational, we'd already have made this transition, right? All the pieces are in place. Electric is cheaper. It's just cheaper to do. It's cheaper to use. Like, I don't know why. No, solar is better. Just, we need to transition to solar. We're just not doing it. That's why I say, instead of divesting from fossil fuel energy, we ought to nationalize it. Of course. No, I absolutely think that the nationalization of fossil fuels is going to be necessary. That any culture that isn't nationalizing their fossil fuels are not serious about it. You're not serious about climate change at all unless you're nationalizing fossil fuels. Like, I don't like. Yeah, let the psychos who are responsible for this crisis maintain control of the resource responsible for doing it. Like, no, it's so stupid. And like, we are going to have to pick winners and losers. Like, we're going to have to say, like, yeah, like, sorry, LOL dolls. Like, we're not going to sell oil for LOL dolls. Like, we need this for, like, growing food and agriculture, right? Did you know that people in China discovered coal over 1,000 years ago, decided not to go ahead with it because they knew it would destroy the planet? I mean, like, white people are kind of manic, eh? Like, if you take a look at, like, all of the cultures that existed in human history, like, the whites, we there's something going on there. We got something. We're a bit fucky. I can't quite put my finger on what it is, but it's just like we always reach for the worst option. Like, anyway. All right, guys, we've reached the end of today's show. Thanks for being here, guys. I really appreciate it. You make this a real treat for me every single time. Really, really, really nice to talk with you. Really nice to share some of these articles. Really nice to witness the decline with people who are also interested in that. I hope it helps you as much as it helps me. Always remember, guys, you are a quantum being, walking around in quantum energy. The billionaire class is spending hundreds of billions of dollars in the vain hope that you'll never realize it. You'll just stay the good little commodity they need you to be. Rebel. Revolt. Repent. Good luck. We're going to need it.